They had warned him about the heat in the mountains of Dorne, but the warning had not reached his bones. Eddard Stark had grown up in a country where spring wore a wolf's pelt even at noon, where shadows were blue and the wind held a bite even in summer. Yet here the air lay on his shoulders like a wet cloak, hot as spilled tea, clinging and heavy. They had ridden since moonset with waterskins thumping and the straps creaking softly at every stride, horses breathing through flared nostrils as if they were scenting coals. He had come because of a letter with no seal, a whisper caught in a lord's hall, a rumor that refused to leave his nights. A tower in the red foothills, a tower with a name too sweet for men in white cloaks. They reached the ridge as the sun lay a coin's width above the eastern stones. The sky was a pale wash of rose and smoke. From this slope, the land folded upon itself like a discarded cloak, rumpled and beautiful. A few tamarisk trees clung to the gullies. Below them, the Dornish sands began, a vast pale sheet that picked up the light like water and threw it back. "It's there," Howland Reed said softly. He pointed with one hand wrapped in leather for his bowstring. The other men did not speak. They were 6 besides Ned, men he trusted with his life and would not name now, because the naming felt like tempting a god that had grown hungry for Stark names. He let his horse nose ahead until the pale stone of the tower rose out of the ridge, stark against the pallid sky. Someone had built it a lifetime ago. Perhaps then the name had seemed right. In the crisp air of dawn, if a man stood on the crown and looked east, he might imagine the sea was just beyond the dunes, a silver plate in the sun. In the stories, a noble prince had come here once with songs and promises. The voice of those stories made the tower seem gentler, a place meant for music and vows. The look of it said otherwise. Its windows were mere slits, its door iron-bound. It cast no shadow yet, but when the sun lifted fully, it would cast a blade of darkness across the eastern slope, neat and thin. The horses stamped and blew. Someone's saddle leather creaked. Ned drew a breath, slow as he could manage, and tasted the mineral tang of the stone. He adjusted his sword belt. He did not feel like a lord now. He felt like a boy from Winterfell with a branch for a sword, standing in front of his brother Brandon, stubbornly refusing to step aside. "Keep your eyes open," he said. The words felt clumsy, and he said them because he could think of nothing better. He looked at Howland and found the Cranigman's green-gray eyes already on him, unreadable. "You have your tokens?" Ned asked. Howland patted the leather pouch at his belt. "As we agreed."
Ned nodded.
He had asked Howland to bring a scrap of old gods with them, as if a ribbon cut from a northern cloak might lay hold on what lay ahead. This was not Winterfell, and there were no red leaves to overhear, but a man did what he could. They descended the last stretch of sandy slope on foot, leading the horses. Their boots slid and crunched. A pair of lizards scurried away, their tiny feet stitching invisible lines in the dust. The tower door loomed ahead. It was ajar, which meant nothing at all. The mountain wind shifted and brought the faintest thread of something. Stew? Herbs warmed on a rock? Or something else a man did not name until he had to?
Ned, Howland murmuret.
He saw them then. 3 figures at the base of the tower where the ground leveled. Sun not yet on their armor, white cloaks folded over steel, bright as chalk in this pale light. They did not look surprised to see him. Perhaps they had been watching. Perhaps they had known for some time he would come. Perhaps the mountain itself had told them. He recognized 2 of the faces at once. He had met them once at a feast, a lifetime ago when banners were mere bright cloth and not obligations that ate the men beneath them. Ser Gerald Hightower, with his heavy features and the dignity that clung to him like old bronze. Ser Arthur Dane, who was younger by far and had the look of a winter star. The third, Oswell Went, dark eyes hooded under a brow like a hinge. "Lord Stark," Dane said. His voice carried a low music, so at odds with the narrowness of the moment that Ned's throat tightened. "You have found your way, and you have not moved," Ned said. That surprised him. He had not meant to be sharp. Dane's mouth angled, neither smile nor frown. "We were bidden to guard," Hightower said. His white cloak lay over one shoulder, the hem brushed with dust. "We do as bidden." Ned's hand settled on his sword hilt because there was nothing else to do with it. The horses behind him stamped, sensing the change in the men. He thought of Robert, mouth bright with victory and blood, shouting after the trident that no dragon's seed would live. He thought of his father hanging like a weight on a rope that would not break, the way the air had gone out of the world for a moment and the sound that had come out of Brandon like a man being unmade. He thought of Lyanna's laughter, bright and hard to catch, the way she used to race across the yard with her hair flying and her skirts hitched high, boots flashing. Inside the tower, a draft moved sideways, as if someone had opened a door across the hall. He heard something then, not with his ears but with the part of him that knew his sister's breath from any other living breath. It traveled along the stone and into the marrow of him. "Sir Arthur," Ned said and stopped. He had planned a speech. He had thought he might plead or threaten. He found none of it in him. He found only his own heartbeat, thumping hard in his neck like the hoofbeats of a horse you cannot see yet. "My sister is here." Hightower's eyes slid once to the tower door, returned to Ned. "There are truths," he said, "that can only be reached with blood." "How much?" Howland asked very quietly. He had stepped up to Ned's shoulder like a second thought that refused to leave. "How much blood do your truths require?" "As much as honor," Hightower said. "No more, no less." There were no more words. Ned put his hand to his sword. So did the men in white. The light changed in that heartbeat. Dawn stepped forward, as if curious. A thin bar of gold found the top corner of the tower. The mountain wind slid down to ground level and stroked the dust. The sound of steel leaving leather was a sigh with teeth. There are fights that men later recount with skill, mapping out every pivot and feint, every clash of blade upon blade. There are fights that slide by like a dream, all the hard edges smudged, and leave a man with a bruise in the shape of question in the middle of his chest. Ned would remember flashes. Arthur Dane's sword lifting dawn, pale as if it were cut from a morning sky, and his own blade answering, the shock traveling down his arm to his shoulder, something in him both crying out and settling into an old seat. Gerald Hightower's patience like a wall a man must lean around to cut. Oswell went's elbow singing like a whip. The white cloaks brightening as the sun climbed, the dust trying to record this and failing, the savory sting of sweat. A hummingbird arrowing past his ear. The astonishing thought, right in the middle of it, that this could not possibly be happening because men who had eaten the same bread under the same roof should not be cutting one another into red pieces on hot gravel. Howland moved like water on rock, the way the Crannogmen moved, small and quick and sliding. Twice he caught what would have been a killing blow and turned it aside so that it only clipped a shoulder or scored a forearm. Ned learned Howland's breath the way he had learned the breath of a camp horse. Martin went down with a cry like a man who has seen winter's first snow and knows there is no wood in the shed. Theo Wool, cursing all the way, drove a man backward into a tumble of stones and paid for it with a cut that laid open his thigh. There was no music in it. The sun climbed steadily. A vulture, black and unafraid, sketched a lazy circle above the tower, shy of nothing. Twice Dane could have killed him. Ned knew it. He was not too proud to know it. The knight turned the blade just enough, sliding off the line of Ned's throat, giving back a cut to the arm that stung and bled. Once, through the bright haze of a knife of light, Ned saw the other man's face as if at a feast, calm and sorrowful. He wondered what sorrow sat there, because it did not feel like his own. Felt older. He had a flicker of a thought, this man does not hate me. Then it was gone into the net of work, the step and counterstep, the steady purposeful terror of it. What broke it was not a clever stroke. It was a sound from inside the tower, thin and angry and alive. A baby's cry, reedy and astonished. The way helpless things announce themselves to a world that may or may not have any room for them. It rose up out of the pale stone like smoke finding a crack. Everything paused in the smallest way. Not a drop in the sword arms, not a conscious look away. Something under every breastbone acknowledged it. Dane's gaze flicked toward the door and returned to Ned's blade. The tiniest beat, but in a fight the smallest beats are oceans. "Stand from him," Oswell went barked. He was angry in a way that men get angry when they are trying not to be afraid. "No," Dane said. He stepped in. Their blades met. Ned gave ground once, twice, felt his heel strike a stone. Howland's hand was in the small of his back before he could fall into death, pushing him forward. Dane's shoulder turned, showing the white line above his left pauldron where the sun made a thin river of light. The end did not feel like prophecy. Howland's knife came quick and low, a move no knight trained in halls of oak and stone would think to watch for at that angle. The blade kissed the exposed skinny place where the armor rose and did not quite meet the gorget. There was a breath, and then there was blood, bright and startled. Dane made a sound like a man who has been addressed by name from behind. He stumbled, did not fall. His sword dipped, was caught by Hightower before it hit the ground. "Arthur," Hightower said, and there were 50 winters in it. Dane bent and pressed his hand hard to the wound, as a farmer might to a split-barrel stave. "Hold it a moment, hold it until you can fetch a rope, until you can set your knee beneath it, until whatever is inside stops running away." "We have no time," he said. He spoke to no one and to everyone. He looked at Ned with eyes the color of morning after ice. "Go to her." Ned did not sheathe his blade. He did not remember deciding that. He ran for the door. It was narrow, it tried to deny him, it scraped his shoulder. The white cloaks did not follow. They turned their faces away as if to guard his back from something that had been following him since he left Winterfell. He felt Howland's presence fall in at his elbow, then slip past him like a thought. The tower's interior smelled of lime and old straw and milk and the faint metallic tang that belongs to blood. The stairs were steep and mean. He clattered up them, counting under his breath not because the numbers mattered, but because if he did not count the facts might rush up on him and strike him in the mouth. The air cooled as he climbed. Light fell through slits and bled on the stair. Howland's shadow went ahead, and Ned felt a sudden coil of anger that anyone else would be faster to reach her. He found her at the top in a room that was nothing and everything. It had been built for storage or solitude. A small bed stood near the window. Willa, he knew her name only because it fell into his mind like a stone from a well, moved between the bed and a kettle set on a brazier. Her hair damp and her mouth pressed shut as if it were holding a prayer in with it. His own teeth. A small red-haired girl he did not know sat on a stool by the wall holding a bundle that made those thin cries. Howland was kneeling, his small clever hands already busy with a little box whose lid he had flipped back without looking. Lyanna lay in the bed with her hair stuck to her neck. She was pale with the pallor of a person who has traveled far in nights, but her eyes were brighter than he had ever seen them, as if some lamp had been lit behind them and it exhausted her and fed her at once. She saw him. He felt the moment go through her, a ripple under the skin like a dropped pebble in a pool.
"Ned."
Her voice was almost whole, only a little thready at the edges. It found a place in him nothing else could reach. He went to his knees so fast his blade clanked on the floor. "Lya," he said, the name he had only said to himself in the last year in all the different tones of grief. Softly, angrily, like an order, like a prayer. Came out now plain and ordinary as it had when she was 6 and he had chased her down the stairs for putting snow in his boots. "Lya, you are not dead." She smiled, brief and a little triumphant and so tired. "Not yet. Not today." His hand found hers. He felt the bones under thin skin, felt the right now of her pulse, small but stubborn. His other hand rose as if it might brush her hair back, but he let it fall. He sensed Howland and the women around them without seeing them. A steady hum, a wheel turning that he had stepped inside of. "He's hungry," the red-haired girl said. "He doesn't like my hands." "Winter wolf blood," Willa said, not unkindly. "He knows the smell he wants." "Mistress, can I?" Lyanna nodded, and the girl crossed to her, crying bundle and all, an awkwardness to her movement that made Ned's throat tighten for reasons he did not examine. The girl laid the baby gently beside Lyanna's breast, and Willa helped with a touch at once deft and reverent, as if adjusting the edge of a sacred cloth. The crying stopped with a little hitch. Lyanna breathed out, and some of the tightness in her face eased. She looked down, then up at Ned again. "This is the part," she said, where you tell me I have been a fool. I will, he said, but only after, and never again. She laughed silently. Tears stood bright at the corners of her eyes. You smell like old leather, she said, and dust, and home. He wanted to say so many things. He wanted to gather them and line them up and look at them and choose one. They clogged his chest. The room was small, filled with the little sounds of new life, the scratch and sigh of it, as if a kettle simmered somewhere. The light was the color of the underside of a cloud at sunset. He had been so long without the sight of her that he could not stop looking at her, as one stares at water after a drought. They wouldn't let you by, she said, nodding toward the stairs. They are stubborn men. They were, he said. He could not bring himself to tell her what the lower room looked like. He glanced at Howland. Some truth passed between them like a handed tool. We reached an agreement. She closed her eyes once, slowly. Arthur, she said, it was not a question. He will have wanted it done properly. He always does. He wanted you seen to, Ned said. That as well. He listened to his own words and found them almost truthful. He would have time later to see what he had left out. Lyanna's gaze slid to the window slit, where a piece of sky was trapped, a little shard of blue. He brought me blue flowers, she said suddenly. Once, in winter. How did they do that? They were not quite blue as when they grow under the gods, but close. They smelled like the first morning after snow when you step out and it's all clean. He was always doing things like that. She frowned at the wall as if there were writing on it. It made everything worse when he did. It made, what is the word, Ned? Harder. Yes, she whispered. Yes. She lowered her head to look at the child again. The corner of her mouth softened. Do you see him? Ned leaned, and the strange ache that comes when a man who has killed many men sees a baby caught him unawares. The child's head was a dark that might turn brown or black or something else entirely when the sun knew it better. His skin had the fine translucent look of a creature newly arrived. His mouth worked with a seriousness that was nearly comic. Who are you? Ned thought, and the answer that whispered back across a long stony valley was one he did not say aloud. He needs a name, Lyanna said. We will need to, oh gods, Ned. Howland has water steeped with willow bark, Willa said quietly. She offered a small cup. Lyanna sipped, and Ned watched the line of her throat, the thinness of it, the way the pulse pushed in it like a small animal. He would have carried her wrapped in furs across the whole of the north on his back if that had been possible. There isn't time, Lyanna said when she had drunk. She looked at him sharply, suddenly very like the 14-year-old who had told him she would ride in the tourney and damn any man who said she must not. Ned, I have to say it before it becomes just another thing we do not say. You must listen and not look away. I am listening. I did not go unwilling. There. She had put the blade to her own skin. She waited for him to bleed. He was quiet because there was no other way to be. The room heard him listening. I left because I could not. The life they wrote for me, she said slowly, as if the words were heavy and she had to push them along. It was a cage with golden bars. He did not break me free with music and poems. It was not like that. He came and he saw me. That was all. He saw me. I had never been seen like that. And you loved him, Ned said, tasting the shape of it, not accusing, not forgiving, only making it a fact of the world like the heat and the stone. I did, she said. And till do. And I know more than I knew then, and I understand the cost better, and still I do not take it back. She drew a breath and made a face as a cramp seized her. Willa touched her forearm, and Lyanna pressed her head back against the thin pillow until it passed. We were wed, she said when she could speak, before gods and men. I am not asking your approval. I am telling you the truth because it matters. I would not have brought him into lies. I could not have borne that. Her gaze sharpened, and there were those who stood for it. Not only a paid septon in a stable. Arthur was there, and Ser Oswell and Ser Gerald. And the man of the cloth wore the star. He risked more than my hand would be worth. He kept a record. There is a copy. Ned heard his own breath leave him. He had tried not to let Hope into the room because Hope is a serpent with a pretty hood. Where? He asked. Here. She flicked her eyes at Howland, and read quiet. He reached under the bed and drew out a flat wooden packet wrapped in a square of linen. There was ribbon at the corners, a wax seal at the center. It had been cracked and resealed. Ned saw at once that Howland had looked and then hidden his looking badly. His heart thumped once violently and steadied. There is more. Lyanna's face was intent, even fierce. He thought of her on a winter morning when Beth Castle had told her she could not ride out with the boys. She had ridden out anyway and gone twice as far as any of them, and Ned had come home with his mouth set because father would be angered and it would be Ned's fault, somehow, for being old enough to know better. Robert will come, or you will go to him. He must hear this out of my mouth, or from yours if I cannot. He must be told the truth, not to tease him with it as some bargaining chip. Truth is its own thing, and he has always said he loves it. Let him love it now. Ned felt the old ache move in his chest, the ache named Robert that had lived there since they scuffed their knees in the Aries yard, when the snow still built along the railing of the rookery court and their breaths made smoke in the cold. Robert, he said softly. The name fell into the place between them like a stone in snow, making a small soft sound and disappearing. He will rage, Lyanna went on almost absently, as if she were describing the dawn's course. He has always raged when he is frightened or when he is hurt. If he were a different sort of man, he would fall quiet. But he is who he is. You know him better than any. Ned did not answer for a moment. He felt as if he were standing in a northern river in spring thaw, water pushing at his legs with an inexorable strength, carrying leaves and old branches from 2 counties upstream. He put his hand on the wooden packet. It was cool, heavier than it looked. I will take this, he said. I will guard it as I would guard you. He looked at Howland and found the man looking back, only his eyes moving. And if I cannot, if I fall, I will take it, Howland said. And if I fall, Willa will. And so on down the line like a string of lanterns against a dark. We will send the light on. Do not fret it now. Lyanna's gaze softened. She put her hand over Ned's and squeezed. He felt the weakness in it and the will, the way a reed bends to a wind so it will not break. There is one more thing, she said. The name. I do not want a silver and crimson name for him. I want him to have a name that tells him who stands with him in this hard world. Oh, Ned, I want a good man to say his name and smile. She made a little grimace of apology. I know it is foolish, but I want it anyway.
Ned swallowed.
He had carried names in his mind these last hard months like embers under ash. John, he said. It shocked him how quickly it came. For a man who put his honor above everything and still found kindness in it. Lyanna's face changed. For a moment the girl of winter came back and looked out of the woman's face. I like it, she whispered. John Snow for a little while if we must, until... She looked at him steadily. Until we do not have to. And if we never find a time when we do not have to, she added, voice low and even. You will stand him where he can see the north, and he will grow with his feet in the soil that knows our names. If we must hide him, I do not begrudge the hiding. But I will not have him hidden behind a lie that makes him less. Ned's hand tightened on hers. The truth of it struck something old and bell-clear in him. I hear you, he said. I swear it, on Winterfell stones and on the old tree and on the steel that keeps me living. I will not make him less. Howland Reed made a small sound in his throat that might have been assent or grief. The baby, John, had fallen heavily asleep with his mouth still open, his tiny breath a ghost on Lyanna's skin. Footsteps sounded on the stair, measured, respectful. Hightower filled the doorway when he stepped through it. He had bound Arthur Dane's wound with a strip torn from his own cloak. Blood had already crept through, an eager stain. Oswell waited behind him, his face blank in the way that a man's face goes blank when he is holding onto a thought like a nail through his palm. Lady Lyanna, Hightower said, and bowed in a way that did not look like yielding so much as like the stone accepting the sea. We have held our trust. You have, Lyanna said. She lifted her chin. Nobody in the room missed how she did it. And now I have something to ask. Not of honor. Of that other thing that honor breaks itself against when the world gets clever. Mercy, Hightower said. Wisdom, Lyanna said. I ask that you bear witness. There are papers. You know what I say is true. You were there. When the time comes, and it will come, I will stand before lords who prefer the stories in their heads to the ones in front of them. You will stand with me, not for him. She nodded toward the sleeping infant. Though you may think you do, but because to twist truth to fit taste makes the world worse. You have sworn to a crown. Crowns must sit on truths, or they cut men's heads to keep from tilting. Hightower's gaze moved from her to Ned and back again. He did not look at the baby. There are vows, he said softly, and vows within vows. Then we will find which vow is oldest, Howland said, and put our steps on that one. Oswell's mouth twitched. Perhaps it was the beginning of a smile. Perhaps it was the edge of a flinch. I will stand where honor and truth ask me to stand, Hightower said at last, and breathed out. And in that breath there was release and grief both. Sir Arthur will live if we can find cool and stillness for him. He can be moved, but not far. We will get you to shade, Howland said briskly. Give me your arm. Willa, fetch me the longer strip. Not that one, the cleaner one. There. Lord Stark, if you will help, carefully. They became a small machine of purposeful movements, a temporary truce between enemies that had cost blood and meat. Hightower's hand shook only a little. Dane's eyes were closed, lashes dark on his cheek. His mouth set as if he were enduring a tale told too slowly, that faith and patience would see him to its end. They bore him to a lower room whose window slit admitted a trickle of wind cool enough to raise gooseflesh on a man's forearms. Went fetched a battered chair without being asked and set it where Lyanna, if she needed to sit in it, would not have to climb a stair to reach. He moved like a man walking through water. The little red-haired girl scrubbed at the floor with a rag, her mouth set. Ned helped Howland pack the wound with clean cloths torn from linen that had been meant for swaddling and would serve two purposes now. The mountains threw small shadows that crept steadily across stones like the hands of clocks in a hall where boys were meant to learn numbers and manners. In the middle of it there was a meal because bodies are so stubborn that way. Willa produced flatbread and olives and a slab of hard cheese. The men ate with the silence of acolytes. Lyanna drank water and a small cup of something brown and bitter, and the lines in her face softened. The baby woke, cried, slept again. Hightower dozed in his chair and woke at once when someone moved near Sir Arthur. Ned took that as a good sign. The dead do not start awake at chairs. In the late afternoon, Howland drew Ned aside into the little corner of the lower room where the air was faintly cooler. He held out the linen-wrapped packet and looked at Ned's face as one might look at a tree one had to climb. "Take it," he said. "When the sun falls behind that ridge and the shadow hits the door, we will leave a man or two here to help them, and the rest of us will go. We will need to move quickly to the river road. I want to be under more sky than this before moonrise." Ned took the packet. His hands did not shake. He told himself that mattered. "We will go to Starfall," he said. "The Danes, we owe them that." "You owe them more than you can give," Howland said softly. "So do I. We will do what we can do. I will load the animals. Tell your sister to prepare if she must. But do not hurry her if you can help it, Ned. She has done a hard thing, and she will do more hard things after. Give her this hour." Ned found his sister dozing with her hand on the baby, a touch as light as a leaf. He did not wake her. He stood and looked at her. He had never been a praying man in the formal way, but words rose up in him and arranged themselves anyway, a braid of hope and anger and foolishness and love. He did not speak them. He opened the window slit wider with both hands and let the room breathe, and he went away to see to horses. They left at dusk in a line that looked for all the world like a small household being moved from one summer camp to another, the way nobility do when the flies grow thick in one place and the water grows sour. Willa rode with Lyanna pillioned before her. a nest of blankets and baby between them. Howland had tied Arthur Dane to a travois pulled by the surest-footed of the pack animals. Ser Oswell walked beside it, an uncomplaining shadow. Hightower rode a horse that had decided, after some argument, to acknowledge the man on its back as a rider. It should have felt like a procession of triumph or ignominy. It felt instead like one of those rare days at the end of the harvest when everyone in a village is moving at once because winter has moved some peace on its own board and now everything else must be changed to match. They moved under the first stars, and the night made of them whatever story it would tell later. Ned rode at the head and thought of John Arryn and of Robert and of Hoster Tully and of the men who would not forgive the shape of this truth even if the truth were as neat as a coin. He thought of Caitlin Tully, whom he was pledged to wed by need and oath, with a face like river light and a steadiness that had surprised him when he met her. He thought of telling her that a baby would come with him into that marriage, not for courtesy, not some lord's byblow to be made a squire later and sent to a keep far away, but a boy who altered the weight of crowns. He felt something inside him change shape to make room for it. It did not make him lighter. They came to Starfall in the hard blue light before dawn 2 days later, the castle rising from its clifftop like a pale hand turned sideways. The roar of the sea made the mountain wind sound like something small. White gulls wheeled and rode the drafts off the headland, their cries sharp and lunatic as joy. A banner hung limp on the sea tower. The wide stair up the cliff had been hewn into the rock by men with good brains and hard hands. Ned found his own legs grateful for the shape of it. A servant with the look of an old tree came to the G. Ate and stared at them for a long time, then led them into the shade of a courtyard where orange trees grew in square beds of earth. He bowed, not too low, not too slight. "My lady has been. She has waited," he said, and Ned could not tell whether that voice held relief or dread. Ashera Dane met them in a gallery where light pooled on the tiles. She wore gray, the color of sky when it holds both rain and light behind it. It made her amethyst eyes look very bright and very dark at the same time. She had the look of someone who had not slept and had schooled her face to reveal nothing she did not choose. When she saw Arthur on the travois, she did not cry out. She went very still. Then she stepped toward him and held his face gently between her palms and pressed her lips to his brow. "You are not allowed," she said in a flat voice that sounded as if she was speaking to the sea, asking it to be less itself. "Not you. It is not permitted." Hightower dismounted and bowed. "Lady," he said, "we have wrongs to account. Let us begin with life where we can." She looked at him and saw the blood on his sleeve and understood. She looked at Oswell Went. She looked at Ned and at Lyanna, whose face had gone all at once as gray as the ash of a burned letter, and at the little shape in the blankets in her arms. She drew a breath. "Come," she said. "We will need clean water and cloths. There is a room, the small one by the east arcade. We will set him there. My maester is not a fool. I will send for him." It all began again, the purposeful moving, the very practical smallness of care that reduces kings and knights and old grievances to the work of hands. Arthur Dane opened his eyes at one point and saw his sister watching him and said something that did not quite become sound. She put her hand over his mouth and shook her head gently, and he appeared to accept this as if she had told him he must not cheat at a child's game. She turned to Lyanna then, slowly, as if moving against a wind. "You," she said. Lyanna nodded. "Me," she said. "Not as you would have it. Not as I would have it either some days. But here I am." Ashara's mouth tightened, and then she smiled, a brittle little thing like glass catching the light. "Do you know I once thought you a fairy from some northern tale," she said. "You came into the hall with snow still clinging to your boots, and you laughed in a way that made me want to laugh, and you looked at the root screen as if it offended you by merely existing. I have thought many things since. I am tired of thinking them." Lyanna stepped forward until she was near enough that Ashera could reach out and touch the baby if she wanted. "I loved him," Lyanna said. "I did not come here to make apology for it. I did not come here to ask forgiveness for it. I came asking for mercy and a witness." Ashara's hand rose and hovered above the blanket and then fell to her side. "I am not merciful," she said. "Not today. But I am a Dane, and I know when a blade is true enough to draw blood without shattering. I will not be moved by your tears, northern girl. Only by the fact that my brother and 2 others who wore white stood before vows in a small room and made themselves complicit in your choice. If they are not shamed, I will not take shame for them. If they are not forgiven, I will not accept forgiveness in their stead. Leave me my own sins. Let me decide which ones to carry. It was not precisely welcome. It was precisely what Lyanna could accept. She bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement that a bargain had been struck. They stayed at Starfall for 8 days that were both very long and very short. Arthur Dane did not die on the first day, nor on the second, and by the 4th he asked for water and for a comb to be brought so his hair might be put in order. "If I am to lose anything," he said, and his voice was as fragile as the wing of a moth, "I will not lose that as well." Hightower and Went took turns sleeping in a chair outside his room. Ned and Howland discussed routes and weather and news, such as it came, coming through the gates of Starfall with the slow dignity news acquires when it must be carried by men and horses. It seemed to moil and slow like something being poured into cold. They heard of the sack of kings landing on the 3rd day, from a traitor with a voice like a cracked bell and a hatred for Lannister red that slipped out of him like a cough. They heard of a queen fled to Dragonstone, of a boy prince with hair like spun gold whose blood had run down good stone, of a girl whose small hand had left a print on the velvet of a bed in a room where no one should have been allowed. Ashera heard that and did not weep. Later, in the garden where the orange trees made a sweetness that was only sometimes pleasant, like remembering a summer when you were 7. Ned saw her bend and put her face in her hands and breathe with hard evenness until the moment passed. He did not go to her. He knew the shape of such moments. You do not touch them. You stand where you are until they are done with you. Lyanna, stronger every day, sat on a low bench in a small cloister and learned her son's face as if it were a new country. She watched him sleep, watched him wake with his tiny fists tight and then relax as he found warm milk. She laughed once when he tried to command the sky with his hand as she herself had done as a girl in Winterfell, and she looked instantly startled by her own laughter, as if she were not sure it belonged to her anymore. She talked with Ashera in small parcels, never more than would fit into a pocket. They did not become friends. They became 2 women who stood at the same place on the shoreline and saw the same weather coming in, and set their feet and tightened their cloaks, and neither asked the other if she was scared because the answer was too obvious to bother with. Willa managed the small kingdom of the nursery with the benign severity of a petty queen. The red-haired girl went about with a sort of stubbornness and an eagerness to be useful that pried Ned's heart open against his will. Her name was Illyria, he learned, a cousin's child to some Dane vassal. Father dead in some border skirmish he had not noticed because he had been too far north killing other men whose names he did not care to recall. He found himself promising her nothing and then bringing her a sweet from the kitchen later anyway because her face had remembered him when he told her his name. On the 8th morning, a rider came with a banner of falcon and moon. Ned stood under the arch as the man dismounted and bowed and offered up a sealed letter. He knew the hand in which his name was written before he broke the wax. John Aaron's words were spare, and that meant something. The man used words like nails. He did not waste them. The gist was plain. Robert was recovering at a slow pace in the camp by the Trident and was enraged by fits and by steady degrees. Tywin Lannister had laid King's Landing at Robert's feet like the head of an enemy on a cushion. Stannis held Storm's End still, starving but unyielding, and Mace Tyrell camped outside with the patience of a cat watching a mouse hole. The mouse had a spine of iron. Jon asked Ned to come to Storm's End if he could. "Bring what truth you have," he had written in one of the few lines that admitted the inside of his mind. "Bring care for Robert, who takes truth like strong wine." "We should go," Ned told Lyanna. "This is the hour. If we wait, the hour will not wait with us." He did not say that if the hour fled they would be left explaining to a king who had found time to go from angry to triumphant, and that is a harder work. Lyanna looked down at Jon in her arms. It still startled him, sometimes, to hear the name inside his head and realize it was about a person who had been a rumor last month and now wrinkled his face up at the sun as if it were an enemy. "We will go," she said. She had a way of saying such things that made them less arguable than the laws of physics. But not like thieves. Not as if we are sneaking a prize out from under someone's nose. We will go on a road in daylight. We will look like what we are. And what is that? Howland asked mildly, turning a bit of knotted string in his fingers. People, Lyanna said simply. Not ghosts from a song. They set out the next morning in a small train that looked, indeed, like nothing more than a household on the move, and that was the point. Arthur Dane could sit a horse now, pale as old linen but upright, a stubborn light in his eyes. Hightower rode slow beside him, his hand near but not touching, and Went took the rear with his head turned a little to the side as if he were listening to something only he could hear. Ashera did not come. She stood at the gate with her hand on the white stone and watched them without waving. Ned lifted his hand to her and she inclined her head slightly. If there was anything else to say, they both chose not to say it there. The ride north and east toward Storm's End took them through lands that were not precisely at war but were not at peace, either. Villages watched them pass with the cool gaze of people who had learned fast to be careful about who came and went. Once they saw a line of men with their shirts off hauling a burned beam out of a little holdfast shell. Their mouths set as if the beam were a choice they had made and not a circumstance. Once they saw a field that had been scythed and then abandoned. The cut grain standing sorrowful as if it were waiting for a hand that would never come. They camped in groves and on patches of high ground and once in the shadow of a smithy that had gone quiet, its chimney still smelling of old smoke. At night Lyanna slept with John tucked against her in a nest of canvas and fur. Ned woke sometimes and watched the pale oval of her face and felt a small terror lift its head in him like a fox scenting the open. What would Robert do? He asked that question of himself over and over, as if repetition would conjure certainty. He knew Robert's rage and he knew Robert's love, and both were large in him, and he did not know which would present itself first. Someone had to put a harness on it. He did not think he had that strength. John Aaron might, but truth had a way of throwing off harnesses at the worst possible moment. They reached Storm's End on a day when the sea had decided to make itself known even a mile inland, sending the smell of salt and rot on a wind that slapped a man's hair into his eyes. The castle rose like a challenge to weather and repeated itself. Here I am, and I will be here when you are tired. Its drum towers were too monumental to be beautiful. They were what they were, and they dared you to make of that an insult. Mace Tyrell's camps spread around the landward side of the walls like new and tidy villages, each pavilion pretty as a cake, pennons flicking in the wind, cooks sending up good smells from practical and ordered fires. Ned looked at it and saw the shape of the siege in the discipline. Stannis Baratheon held inside a drum of stone with hunger for a courtier and stubbornness for a priest, and the gardener was patient. The walls would not bleach him into mercy. John Aaron's tent stood not very far from the green and gold, a white canvas with a simple device and a sobriety that made Ned's heart a little easier. They were waved through by men with falcons on their breast, and a stillness that would have admired itself if it had been less honest. John Aaron rose when they entered, and for a moment the years fell off his face and Ned saw the lean hawk of a younger man who had been a refuge. Then the years fell back and sat upon his shoulders, and that was all right. They had paid for that wear as well. Ned, John said, and embraced him, and then turned and bowed to Lyanna like a man who meant it and not as a courtesy. My lady, you look like a woman who has done what I have never done in all my long foolish life, and I will not insult you by pretending to understand it. I am very glad to see you alive. Lyanna smiled at him with sudden warmth, the sort that had made friends for her like sparks finding fibers. My lord, she said, you are a rock where men tie their lines. You are a friend to me because you are his friend. She nodded at Ned. I thank you for that. John Aaron's eyes flicked to the bundle in her arms and then to the men behind her. He saw Hightower and Went and Dane and made a small hum in his throat like a man seeing three unexpected pieces on a board and wondering what cleverness had put them there. We will have to work quickly, he said. Mace delays his withdrawal because it pleases him to receive messages with many seals. He would stay here until snow if the cooks were obliging. Robert will come because he wishes to see his brother. He thinks he wants to see you. He looked at Lyanna again. It may be, I cannot say what it will be. Then we will bring him what is, Lyanna said. She drew breath, steadying herself. Now then, word went out like thrown pebbles, ripples moving through tents and pavilions. Ned waited and breathed salt and wet and watched gulls will like arrogant thoughts. He felt the thing that was about to happen as if it were weather rolling in, unavoidable as gravity. Hightower stood to one side, calm as if he were back in some hall wearing a different cloak, and Oswell whence stillness now looked like a choice rather than a lack. Arthur Dane leaned a little where he stood, but he was upright, and there was a small smile at the corner of his mouth that implied he took pleasure in seeing something done well even if it undid him. Robert came with his step still heavy from healing, wrapped in blue and gold, his sword harness slung too carelessly, his hair a black thundercloud around his brow. He looked bigger than he had at the Eyrie, bigger even than he had in the yard at the Trident when the river had tried to throw them all down. Perhaps grief had made him grow. Perhaps Ned was only seeing him as he was, without the softening of memories. John Arryn walked just behind him, a small gravity that kept the larger planet from falling into the sun. Robert's eyes found Lyanna as if he had been looking for her in every room of his life and had finally opened the right door. The change in his face was like the wind shifting from east to west in an instant. He went to her as a man goes to water. He stopped a pace away and looked at her and then at the bundle, and then he laughed a short, incredulous sound that might have been joy, might have been pain. "Lya," he said. The voice was boyish for a heartbeat, then full and shrewd and roaring as it used to be when he ordered another cup. "Lya, gods be kind, look at you. I did not dare." He shook his head at a loss. You are real." "I am," Lyanna said, as stubbornly as ever. She smiled at him, a small careful smile. "Robert, this is John." She tilted the infant gently so that Robert could see a tiny scrunched face and the flail of a hand. "He is my son." Robert's mouth opened. He made no sound. He looked at the baby as if he were a device he had seen in a maester's book, crafted cleverly out of brass and silver, beautiful to look at and capable of moving kings. He reached out and then snatched his hand back, a bear remembering that a cup is not his to seize. "Your son," he said. He did not say our. Ned heard it, and John Arryn heard it, and even Mace Tyrell's page, who had been allowed to linger within earshot, heard it. The space that existed suddenly around that pronoun, a space big enough to hold a war. By my husband," Lyanna said, and her voice was clear as steel on a frosty day. "Robert, listen to me. I will not cut this to spare us. I was wed to Prince Rhaegar, before gods and men. We were witnessed. We were recorded. I went with him willingly. I do not ask your forgiveness. I could live without it." She swallowed and added softer. "I would rather not, but I could. But I do ask you to hear me." Silence. Even the sea seemed to draw back a breath. Robert's face went white, then red, then white again like cliffs in winter light when clouds pass in front of the sun. He looked at Ned. He looked at John Arryn. He looked at Hightower and Dane, and Oswell went, and the recognition there did something to his mouth, which went tight with contempt. "Is this a jest?" Robert said at last in a voice that did not sound like his. "Is this some court trick? Did Tywin send you to torment me in the place of a dwarf with bells on his shoes? If this is some mad Ned." He turned all at once on Ned. The look was so naked it made Ned's stomach clench. "Tell her to stop. Tell her to say the thing she means. Tell her to say, I was taken. I was forced. I bore a bastard from rape. Forgive me, Robert. Take me home and we will mend it." Ned's mouth was dry. "I cannot," he said, "because that is not the truth." Robert's face. Oh, it was a ruin. All of a sudden it was the ruin of a strong place after a fire. He spun away from the small court they had made and took 3 steps as if he might walk into the sea and not come back. He turned again. "Truth," he said. He spat the word like a gristly bit of meat. "Truth is what we make with swords. The truth at the Trident was that a prince fell beneath my hammer and the river bore him down like any man. The truth in King's Landing is that a mad king is a red smear. Truth, truth. This truth is older than your victory. Lyanna said. "It does not bend to your hammer." She held his gaze. "And if you put your hammer to it, it will break you." Somewhere in one of the green pavilions there was the thin sound of a pipe, beginning a tune and then being cut off when the player realized this was not the hour for it. A gull fought the wind and cried, and the wind carried the cry away unashamed. Mace Tyrell with 6 at 10 dance and the smell of good food clinging to him like an expensive oil, had approached the edge of the circle of men watching, hoping to see something he could make use of, and paused there in sudden proper sobriety. Stannis Baratheon, drawn lean with hunger and stubbornness and rage he had refined like iron, stood on the wall walk above, his jaw set as if he had been chiseled. He was not a man to show surprise. Perhaps he did not feel it. Perhaps it had been burnt out of him in the months past. Still, Ned thought, somewhere in him some small gear slipped its tooth. Jon Arryn stepped forward then and did what he was good at. He put words to the shape the facts had taken. "Robert," he said, "the lady says she was wed. That would make the child legitimate. If that is truth, then it is truth that matters. There are men here," he nodded at Hightower, at Dane, at Went, "who wore white cloaks and who may have stood witness. There may be papers. There may be a record in the Starry September's registry. If the man who wrote the lines still draws breath, or if the papers were kept and not burnt by a madman's whim, we can discover these things. If they are true, then what?" Robert demanded. He looked bigger when he was cornered, as if he would push his flesh outward and make of himself a wall. "Then we kneel and hand back the crown to a dragon babe? Do I take this child on my knee and kiss its head and swear to keep it safe from men like me? The realm will be so glad. The men who bled with me will sing. The North will dance with joy. What do you want of me, Jon? What do you want of me, Ned? What does she think I am?" "A man," Lyanna said. "That is all I have ever thought you. A man who will not cut down a child because a song in his heart is broken. A man who can be hurt and still be whole. Do not mistake me. I am not asking you to love him. He will have love. I am asking you to live with truth, as we all must." Robert's chest was heaving. Ned had seen him like this in taverns and in the yard and once in the rookery where they should have been quiet. Some small part of him had learned to step aside inside himself when it came. Now he did not step aside. He stood in the way of it, gently, as a man stands in the way of a horse and shows his hands. "Brother," he said quietly, using the word in the only way it had ever meant anything. "You do not have to decide all in this heartbeat. You may have time. There is a siege here that must be ended. Mace will want terms. Stannis's men need bread. You can." Robert's eyes slid to Stannis like a blade. "My brother will have bread," he said. "He will have it now." He raised his hand, and a squire who had been standing with the expression of a man carved into a post sprang into motion like a cut rope. The squire ran. People moved. The siege began to change shape, not because of reason but because Robert's will was a wind that had shifted. He turned back to Lyanna. He looked at the baby again and then away. "If this is your truth," he said hoarsely, "then you have killed something in me that cannot be mended." "No," Lyanna said, and for the first time her voice shook.
"No, Robert."
"Do not give me that. Do not make me the murderer of a thing you left out in the rain too often. You let it crack. I did not. I will bear what is mine. I will not bear yours." Robert flinched as if she had struck him. For a heartbeat Ned thought he might hit her and prepared to be broken on Robert's fists rather than see it. Then the blow did not come. The big man lifted his hands, set them on his own head for a second as if he could hold it together, then let them fall. "We are done here," he said, not loudly, but loud enough. "Jon." He did not finish. He turned, and Jon Arryn fell into step almost without making a choice, and they went away into the business of untying a siege and giving a stubborn garrison bread without admitting defeat, which is the sort of magic true lords perform when they can. Hightower stepped forward. He bowed to Lyanna again, as if he were back in a hall, as if the shape of it would shelter them all from the weather. "My lady," he said, "I can speak to the record as far as a man can speak." "There is a paper," Howland said. He produced it as if it were an infant less delicate than the one that had just been presented, and handed it to John Aaron, who took it the way a careful man takes a sword he does not recognize yet. Weight in the palm, balance tested, the blade held still so it does not cut. Ned watched the men who surrounded them watch the paper move from hand to hand. An ordinary thing made suddenly heavy. He knew some of their faces. Stannis's jaw tightened further, which Ned would have thought impossible. Mace Tyrell's eyes went mild and placid, which meant he was doing arithmetic in his head. Randall Tarley, at Mace's left shoulder, looked as if he had been asked to swallow gravel and would do it to demonstrate that he could. Paxter Redwine's lips moved as if he were running several different futures through his mind like different wines through his mouth, seeking the one that would bite pleasantly on his tongue. None of that would matter, not at once. What would matter was where Robert's next breath took him. Lyanna stood very still, her face calm with the calm that comes when a person has thrown her last stone and now must watch the water receive it. The baby slept. The sea went on. Somewhere in the pavilions a cook shouted at a boy to bring more wood for the fire. Somewhere above, a gull dropped a shell on rock to break it and ate the meat that lay inside with a greed that shocked no one. When the tent had emptied a little and the court's shape lost its edges, Ned went to Lyanna and put his hand over hers. It lay lightly on the blanket over Jon's belly. "You are iron," he said quietly. She looked up at him with a small crooked smile that made his throat tighten. "No," she said, "I am stubborn. It looks like iron when the light falls a certain way." Her eyes searched his face. "Will you hate me too?" He closed his eyes for a moment. "No," he said. "I have hated enough and it has fed nothing useful." She drew a breath in as if she were smelling snow. "Good," she said. "Then we will go on. However we must." She glanced toward the pavilion where John Aaron had disappeared with the paper and a small army of difficult men. "Do you think they will take the truth and make it a throne?" "I do not know," Ned said. He thought of the soon-to-be ended siege, of the sacked city far to the north and the blood on good stone, of a queen carrying her last child across a storm. He thought of winter, which did not care about who sat on summer's thrones. "But I think we have done what we had to. The rest will be another battle, and there will be many. If I cannot sleep for them, I will at least be tired for honest reasons." Lyanna laughed softly at that, and there was a piece of Winterfell in it. For a heartbeat, the salt tang became the clean iron of a cold yard where boys clashed wooden swords and a girl ran across fresh snow, leaving bright prints that a brother could follow. She touched the baby's brow lightly with 2 fingers. "John," she said to him, and the name felt like a promise done up in plain cloth. "We are not done. We are only at a beginning." From the wall walk above, Stannis Baratheon watched his brother cross the yard with John Aaron, their heads bent close. He lifted his gaze to the sky as if to find there some shape that would make this fit inside the frame of his mind. He found only gulls and cloud. "Truth," he said under his breath, and made a grimace like a man biting into an unripe fruit. He turned and began to give orders to his men. Bread was coming, and with it perhaps terms and names and new banners to salute. The world had moved a piece. He had to move the ones in his hand to answer. In the Tyrell pavilion, Mace poured wine with great seriousness and announced to no one in particular that the North produced very handsome women when they were not being obstinate. Randall Tarley said nothing. Paxter Redwine hid a smile and asked about the weather on Dragonstone in autumn. Some young lordling with the long hair of fashion asked if Targaryens truly could bind dragons if they pleased, and another said no, only in the old tales, and besides, there were no dragons now, and the first laughed and said the world is not obliged to keep pace with what I believe. Under the white of John Aaron's canvas, Hightower spoke plainly of rooms and witnesses and a septon with hands that shook and a ledger with a neat and patient hand ruling the columns. John Aaron listened as a man would watch a mason place stones, understanding that walls are built by small correctness over and over. Sometimes he asked a very small question. Sometimes he said nothing for long stretches and then wrote a single line with a pen he sharpened himself so it would not blot. Ned stood by and watched, present at the construction of a thing that would either hold or be pulled down when a larger hand found it inconvenient. Outside, Lyanna fed John and then walked slowly in the wind until the baby slept. Illyria trotted beside her and told her very serious stories about the orange harvests and the way small crabs hid under the seaweed, and how sometimes at night she heard men singing and wished they would stop because it made her lonely. Lyanna listened, and the color came back into her face the way it comes back into a field after frost. She paused once and leaned her forehead against the salt-damp stone, and Ned, watching from a distance, closed his eyes, because a brother can watch his sister face a king, but there are some prayers he does not need to see written. Night came early with clouds. Torches flowered in the camps, gold and fragrant with pitch, and the sea's dark mouth moved and moved. In the quiet hours after the shouting of orders stilled and the last bowls were licked clean, Ned sat with Howland Reed under the lee of a cart and shared a skin of wine that tasted like it had been transported more than once in less than careful ways. "How many times will we have to tell this truth?" Ned asked. He was not seeking a number. "As many as it takes," Howland said. "Truth is not a single stone, my lord. It is a path made by many feet. Walk it enough. It's the only place the grass will not cover." "And if the grass covers it anyway?" Ned asked. "Then we cut it back," Howland said. "We have knives. We have time." Ned smiled into the dark. "I have never had much time." "You do now," Howland said. "She is alive." Ned looked up at the black shape of storm's end against cloud and listened to the sea trying to erase the shore. He thought of his father's voice telling him the names of their bannermen. He thought of Caitlin Tully's steady eyes and what she would say and what she would not say. He thought of Robert, whose heart had always been both too big and too small at once. He thought of a boy named John whose existence was a knot in the rope they all held, which might hold them or hang them, depending on the bay it was tied to. He breathed in. He breathed out. Morning would come again and be followed by complicated days. He found himself, despite it, tonight, in this small space under a cart while gulls cried on the shore and men dreamed of bread, simply glad of his sister's breathing in the next tent and the small huff-huff of a baby's studious sleep. Sometimes a man must let his joy in by stealth, when the guards are busy elsewhere. When morning came, rain came with it. A slow and steady rain that patted the canvas overhead like a careful hand. The siege lifted in the rain. The banners came down a little so that they would not soak and grow heavy. Men went in and out of Storm's End carrying sacks of flour, barrels of salt fish, wheels of cheese, and the world looked for a time like a marketplace without laughter. Stannis stood in the gate and accepted the bread with a face that refused to give anyone the courtesy of seeing relief. Robert went to him and hugged him with a great wet slap like a seal striking water. Stannis endured it. Their brother, Renly, a small boy with eyes too big for his head and a mouth that already knew when to smile and when to turn down, stared in awe at the size of the world, and the world did not notice. Lyanna's truth did not end the rebellion. The rebellion was too hungry for that. But the shape of what followed was different because a woman had stood like a post in a flood with a child in her arms and said words that did not yield to desire. Some men grew quiet who might otherwise have shouted. Some raised their voices who might have watched only. Messengers rode with letters whose wax kept breaking in the damp. Names were spoken in halls where no one had thought they would be spoken again. Somewhere, in a room no one spared a thought for, a scribe sharpened his quill and drew a careful line in a ledger and blew on it so it would dry before it smeared. That night, when the rain eased, Ned found Lyanna sitting in the open with a blanket drawn around her shoulders, drawn a warm weight against her. The sea's voice was lower now, a purr. The clouds had torn, and a few stars peered through like curious children looking down a stairwell. He sat beside her and said nothing when she leaned her head against his shoulder. They watched the torches gutter and the puddles grow. Jon's breath warmed the air between them. "He will be hard," Lyanna said after a long time, so long that the night had forgotten they were there. "The world will be hard on him. So will we," Ned said. "In the right way." Lyanna was quiet. Then, her hand on the little rise of Jon's belly, her fingers splayed as if she were measuring out the space he would fill. "I used to think the world was something you could outpace," she said softly, as if she were confessing to herself. I thought if I ran fast enough it would turn into something else. I think now it is like this sea. It does not change for you. You change yourself to stand in it." Ned smiled into the dark. "When did you get wise?" he asked. "You were a vexing child." "I learned while I bled," she said, in a tone without self-pity. "It is not the worst school. It charges in a currency that cannot be counterfeited." They sat until the damp made their hair heavy and their cloaks smelled of wet wool. When they rose, the baby stirred and made a small noise like a question. Lyanna's hand soothed him, the way a mother's hand answers without words. In the next days, they would learn the particular measure of Robert's acceptance and refusal, the compromise Jon Arryn would attempt to shape, the fury Stannis would hold like a coal in his teeth, the eager opportunism in Mace Tyrell's tidy camp. They would see the Lannisters' polite faces and careful lies. They would write letters to Riverrun and order blankets and consider ship passages and count the arrows left in the quivers. They would find that truth, once spoken, created work every day like a farm does, endless and unglamorous. But not tonight. Tonight there was only the sound of the sea, and the beat of a child's heart, small and insistent as a drum softly played to keep time for dancers yet to enter. And so they went in to sleep a little and to wake, and to be called into the next day's work by the gulls and the smell of bread. The rain did not stop for 2 days. It came in drifts and veils, sometimes so fine it lifted off the ground like breath, sometimes beaded and heavy so that the ropes of the tents turned dark and slick and men swore softly as they checked knots that did not need checking. The camps sounded different in rain. Voices carried less. A man might think his own thoughts louder. Fires smoked more. Bread tasted a little wetter and somehow sweeter. Ned learned the sound of the sea in the rain, a steady shouldering like oxen moving in darkness. On the afternoon of the second day, the clouds frayed along their western edges and the air grew wider. A trumpet sounded, not a brassy battle call, but the clear short notes men use for ceremony. Stannis Baratheon came into the yard with the measured step of a man who has slept 4 hours every night for months and believes he can do so forever if he must. The men who had starved with him fell into ranks without being told because their bodies remembered before their minds agreed. Robert appeared, too, shoulders broad and hair wet. His face closed to strangers and open to whatever he could not help. Jon Arryn stood with his hands behind his back, head a little lowered, listening to the way the wind pressed the tents. Ned and Howland slipped into the edges of the crowd, wet cloaks drawing heat from shoulders. Lyanna watched from the open flap of the Arryn canvas, Jon drowsing in her arms, his mouth making small movements as if he were considering an argument and had not yet found where to begin. Stannis called a name. A man stepped forward from the thin ranks of the garrison, lean and wind-burned, hair chopped close with a knife, a beard that tried to make up for what the hair lacked. His eyes were the color of tide pools under cloud. Ned had seen him once, back when the Onion boats had slipped through the Tyrell blockade like stubborn thoughts through a strong skull. He had not known his name then. Stannis spoke it now in his hard rasp. "Davos of Flea Bottom," he said, and for an instant the smallest of smiles touched the corner of his mouth, not for humor but for accuracy, as if he found correctness a flavor he could relish. Davos stepped awkwardly, as a man does when a floor he expects to tilt lies still under him. He knelt without grace and with honesty. His hands were big and work-bent. He smelled faintly of salt and smoke. "You saved my men," Stannis said. "You saved me. There are debts. I like my books even. Rise." Davos rose, distrust and a sort of reluctant wonder war on his face, and knelt again when Stannis' sword came out, not with flourish but with purpose. It rested a moment on Davos' shoulder, then the other. "Ser Davos Seaworth," Stannis said, "I make you a knight for bringing onions and courage through pretty banners and fine boats. I will take your fingers for your smuggling." He turned his head slightly. The rain made his jaw look carved. "But I will never forget your service. That is the shape of justice. I cannot round off the edges for the sake of beauty." "Thank you, my lord," Davos said, voice rough as rope. He did not sound thankful. He sounded like a man receiving a weight he had agreed to carry. "Your wife will teach you to be what you are now if she is half as clever as rumor claims," Robert called out, trying for ease and achieving something that, from the crowd, looked enough like it. And if she is not clever, she will be proud. His laugh came late and was not entirely forced. You have a face I will not forget, Ser Davos. I will want you near to cook my fish when I come to eat it. Rain stippled the yard. The men laughed briefly, gladly, because laughter is a handhold. Lyanna watched Robert's mouth and saw where it trembled when he shut it again. She pressed her lips to Jon's forehead as if she were convincing herself that warmth moved both ways. There were other small fittings and acknowledgments. Men whose names would never be carved on stone being called forward and given the sort of sentences a life can lean on when it has to. Jon Arryn's voice took its turn, plain and precise, the way a man splits kindling. One clean stroke after another. Hightower spoke 3 low sentences to a bearded man with a scarred lip, and the man bowed so deeply that his nose nearly touched wet earth. Oswell gave a boy a small square of white cloth and said something that made the boy blush and straighten. Arthur Dane watched it from a stool at the edge of canvas, his sister near, his eyes clearer every day. Once, in the midst of it, he caught Ned's gaze and nodded, a single small motion, as if to say, "We are beginning to knit cuts." That night Robert went down to the shore alone, where he thought he did. The rain had settled to a fine mist that made hair curl and skin itch, and the sea beat the stones with a slow temper, as if angered but not yet summoned to its full strength. He walked until his boots filled with water when he stepped into a pool that had crept softly up from the tide. He kept walking. Ned followed at a distance because he knew the shape Robert's back took when he was about to strike something, and he did not want it to be a man. Robert found a length of driftwood and smashed it against a rock, and then another, his breath coming in growls. "Truth," he muttered between blows, and then other words that were not meant for anyone else's hearing. He worked until the wood was splinters and the rock had given nothing back but damp, and then he stood with his hands at his sides and looked at the sea like a man considers a friend he does not understand and perhaps never did. He turned then, slower, and saw Ned, and the look that came into his eyes was not anger but a tiredness so deep that for a moment he seemed older than all the men they called old. He came, not quickly, but steadily, and when he was close enough, he put his hands on Ned's shoulders hard and shook him once. "Is it true?" he asked. It was a child's question and a king's. "It is," Ned said, "as true as the rock under your feet." Robert's face went through a dozen small changes, as weather does behind a thin curtain. "A boy," he said, "a boy with that man's blood." He spat not into the sea but onto the stones. "She said I was a man, as if that were a thing one could set like a cup and have it hold. I am not made for this kind of not killing." Ned did not smile. He did not comfort. He took Robert's wrists and removed his hands gently from his shoulders because he could not carry both the weight of them and his own. "Then be made for it," he said. "That is all men ever do. We shape ourselves to a world that does not care. You cracked yourself this last year. Do not hand her the pieces and tell her she dropped you." Robert stared at him. Then he laughed, a harsh short thing, and then he did smile, unwilling and small. "She said the same," he muttered. "Gods take you both. I should have had you married to each other." "We were both too stubborn," Ned said. The seaside. They stood a while in the gray. When they went up toward light and tents, they did not speak. It was enough that the sound of their boots on wet stones remembered the same paths. The morning brought clear sky and wind like new canvas. Men worked faster under such a sky, voices brighter with the easing of pain. Mace Tyrell sent a hamper with bread and honey and soft cheese for Lyanna, in recognition of a lady's trials. And it came with 3 too-smooth young men who stood like carved green marble while Willa accepted and Illyria glowed. Lyanna sent back a small pale sprig of the mountain herb that Willa had steeped with willow for her, and the kind of smile that makes a man consider his own motives. And the message came back that the Lord of Highgarden was delighted to be of use and would be at her service in any way she desired, and she said to Ned afterward in a voice without malice that if she asked him for his banners to march backward to Old Town, he would send them wrapped with ribbon. "Do not ask him," Ned said. "I would not," Lyanna answered. "The ribbons would catch on stones and men would bleed." She touched John's cheek with her knuckle, gentle as if she had not learned the shape of him with both hands daily since his first breath. He gurgled solemnly back at her as if weighing an argument and decided to save it for later. John Aaron will call us together. I can feel him thinking. He did. He sent for them that afternoon under the white canvas that made faces look honest and lies faint. The circle, there was a small kingdom. Robert, Stannis, John Aaron, Ned, Hightower, and Dane and Oswell went a little set apart. Mace Tyrell, Paxter Redwine, Randall Tarley, Garland, and a lesser lord from the marches whose name Ned forgot the instant it was spoken. 2 of Robert's Stormlords whose faces were almost one face in the way closeness makes men resemble the place they serve. Lyanna came and sat at the edge, not behind, with Willa and Illyria just within call. She did not speak unless a question went to her, and men looked at her less than they looked at the bundled fact in her arms. When they did glance at her, they glanced away quickly as if looking longer might make their own faces flinch. John Aaron laid the linen packet on the table. The wax seal bore the print of a star and a crown, not freshly cut but not yet worn to haze. He did not break it. He had done so already, with Hightower and Dane and 2 septons and a maester to witness. He laid beside it a copy he himself had made in his fair cramped hand, a faithful shadow, and a 3rd copy in the blunter schoolboy letters of one of his squires, the way an honest man does when he expects other men to accuse him of slight. "We have here," he said, "what the witnesses present believe to be a record of a union solemnized in the sight of the 7, in a place named, not given here to protect the living, by a sworn brother of the faith who at that time held a post in a sept under the starry September's authority. Sir Gerald Hightower and Sir Arthur Dane swear that they were present. Sir Oswell went swears as well. The septon's name is written, Maribald Cress. I have sent a man to the starry September with a discreet request. I have also sent a man who is not my man to the same place, with the same question written differently, so that we may have witness from both hands." "Why send a man of your own at all?" Randall Tarley asked, voice like a whetstone. "If you trust not the answers." "Because men are easier to trust," John Aaron said mildly, "when they are watched by men who do not trust them." Mace Tyrell smiled the way cats smile at canaries who cannot count bars. "If this marriage is true, then terribly unfortunate things follow," he observed. "Our friends in Dorne will be mad," Stannis said flatly. "Distraught," Mace amended, "in a manner that may express itself with a certain vigor." He looked at the child and then up. "It would, however, be much worse if the marriage were not found. And one day the lady said that it was, and we had nothing to set against the words. Truth is a tool. Cuts when you use it, and it cuts worse when you do not." Robert had not sat. He frowned down at the table as if it had cheated him at dice. "We are not deciding whether flowers were properly arranged," he said. "A king fell under my hammer. His son did not sit his father's chair because he broke the realm, and the realm broke him back. Fire could not hold its own house. We have our feet in the ash of it. Now I am to be told there is a baby with a better claim to a crown than the man who won it and will have to feed it. No, there are battles one does not fight. We will not seat a dragon whelp to rule over men who killed his nest." Ned waited, because he had learned to wait around Robert as one stands outside a forge until the iron cools and can be handled. John Aaron did not wait. That was his skill, knowing when to take iron barehanded and when to reach for tongs. "No one asks you to swear fealty to swaddling," he said. "The law as men have used it in similar times gives us paths." He ticked them off with a forefinger as if the points were small stones set bedding under the walls they were building. "We might summon a great council of the realm and ask the lords to choose a king as our forebears did at the time of Aegon III and earlier. We might declare the Targaryens attainted for crimes of the line, and therefore all of them may be put outside the law's shelter. We might name you king by right of conquest and then also adopt any mitigations we choose to maintain peace. Pardon to some, exile to others, wardship for a child. We might choose to pretend none of this exists until the door gives way and wolves come in, and then it is too late to bar it. I do not recommend that last. The wolves are, in this instance, named Tywin and Dorne, and perhaps a mother on Dragonstone who will either die and make saints of her children or live and make banners for them. Lyanna felt all the faces in the tent tilt toward her as if moved by a wind. She did not look at them. She looked at Jon and at the table and at Jon Arryn. He did not ask her to speak. He did not ask Mace. He did not ask Randyll Tarly because the man's answers were always heavier than the question asked for. He asked Hightower, "You served a king who is dead," he said. "You serve vows that say you serve the king who lives. Tell me what your vows ask of you now." Hightower's eyes were level. He held himself like a tower had thought about the idea of learning to bend and decided against it. "I am a white sword," he said quietly. "Not a judge's wig. I have opinions, what man does not, whose eyes work and whose heart beats. But I have a duty first. If the realm names a king, I will swear to him. If the realm chooses, in its business, to set a child aside and call it wisdom, I will accept the weight of that choice upon the shoulders of those who claim the right. Until then, we guard those who are royal because the blood they carry draws blades like meat draws flies. I do not ask permission for that. I say it to you because you are men whose hands move large levers. You should know where I will stand if the lever slips. You will stand in my way if I decide to stamp the last of that blood out," Robert said, not roaring, not whispering. His voice humped like a hill. "Say it." "I will stand," Hightower said. "Yes." Robert stared at him a long time and did not bli. "Okay." Then he nodded once. "Good," he said. "Then I will not be ashamed to leave this child breathing when I turn my back. It is a strange comfort, but it is one." He turned to Jon Arryn. "It is the Great Council, then. Call it. Call it in a place where the walls will not fall down if men shout. Not King's Landing. The city stinks of Lannister mercy and blood. Not Old Town. I will not have the Hightower called impartial when his house looms over it. Harrenhal," Ned said before anyone else. The word left a taste of iron in his mouth. "It is great enough, it is central, and its stones are old enough to have forgotten who last wronged whom." Robert's mouth twitched. "Ha!" he said. "Harrenhal. Once we danced there while a whole realm fooled itself. Let us try truth in its halls and see if the stones like that any better." He looked at Mace Tyrell. "You will send bread and wine and cooks enough to feed it." Mace bowed, broad and sincere as sunflowers bow toward light. "Gladly," he said. "My bannermen will walk more quickly when they know there will be tables at the end. Men think with their stomachs more honestly than they think with their heads." Stannis's jaw moved as if he were chewing flint. "We should not gather all our heads under a roof that knows fire," he said. "But we will do it, and after I will take ships to Dragonstone. There are seas which do not know bread." He glanced once at Lyanna and the child and looked away with the clean, brutal fairness that was the best and the worst thing about him. "If we are to declare the line attainted, we had best have fire to do it with. If we are to spare what is left, we must be strong enough to enforce our mercy. Weak mercy is worse than strong cruelty. It teaches men to despise law." Jon Arryn inclined his head. "You will have ships," he said, "and men who will use them properly. We will keep supplies going to rebuild what this siege cost. Lord Tyrell, your grace will be welcomed and accounted for."
Lord Stark, Ned.
He looked to him, and Ned felt the years between them like planks underfoot, solid and tested. "You must ride to Riverrun." Ned nodded before Jon finished speaking. The knot had always been there, waiting. "My father's bones," he said. "My brother's. And the marriage we set between words when we needed blood bound with blood." He breathed out. "I will go. I had thought to go to King's Landing first to gather what honor may be scraped off good stone there. But there are more important bones." "Bring the bones north," Lyanna said. She did not say, "Bring our father home." She did not need to. "And you?" Robert asked her abruptly. It was like him to turn all at once, to remember that a person was in the room and decide to deal with the whole of her and not in parts. "Will you go north with him? Will you sit behind Winterfell's walls and teach that child to grow straight as a spear and gentle as water?" Lyanna studied his face the way one looks at a map before choosing a road. "I will go north," she said. "I do not know how long the road will be, but the north is where his first steps will be taken." The gods will know his name. When he is older, if he should have to understand what he is beyond us, we will show him. Not before. She lifted her chin. I will not have him grow up as a banner in men's mouths. I will not have him taught to be a crown or a martyr. I will have him taught to be a boy. Robert held her gaze and then dropped it, as if the stare itself were careless violence. Good, he muttered. I do not know what I want you to be. I never did. It seems the gods have spared us an answer to that. He turned to John Aaron with a relief almost crude in its nakedness. Send your ravens. We will go to Harrenhal. Tywin must bring his clean hands or keep them clean in the west, and let the rest of us decide if kings are made of iron or air. Tywin Lannister read the raven's message in the great solar of the Red Keep with a face that had been taught 30 years ago not to betray what it held and had never forgotten the lesson. The city around him smelled of smoke and new nails and the sourness of men who had eaten the wrong food at the wrong time. The women in the streets had learned at once which doors to avoid and which to knock on for coin. The men had learned whose boots not to look at. A sullen calm lay over it all, like oil on water. Pycelle sat a little back, old and soft and pleased with his own softness, fingers adjusting his chain as if he and the metal around his neck were in a long marriage that required constant soothing. Varys stood in shadow, hands folded like a man in prayer who had given up on the gods. Jaime Lannister, white cloak clean and eyes too bright, leaned against the window embrasure and watched a gull hunt invisible tides in the air above the bay. Cersei sat on a chair with a low back, her green eyes trying to be indifferent and failing at intervals. Tyrion Lannister had found a place on a stool that made his knees angle in ways that would have pained another man. He had a cup in his hand and a look on his face as though what he tasted was interesting above the level of pleasure. Harrenhal, Tywin said, when he had read twice and then had Varys read it aloud, because that let him hear his own words in another's careful tone. Of course, the Stark boy has a sense of drama. Drama has its uses, Varys murmured. People remember the shape of it after the words are forgotten. Oh, your grace, the city loves a story. It rests tired feet. Cersei's lip curled. If they wished to keep the city's comfort in mind, she said, they would have held the council here. The great September is still standing, barely, and the throne is under this roof. Or do we no longer pretend that matters? Tywin did not look at her. Value lay that way, and he would not spend it where he would gain no interest. We will go, he said. We will go with sufficient men to remind a gathering what a decision means. His mouth barely moved. And we will bring a bride. Jaime's head turned. You mean me, he said lightly. I hope she is pretty. I am in a mood to be delighted. Not you, Tywin said. He did not permit annoyance to touch the words. You, unfortunately, are already wed to something you will not be allowed to throw off. It will be the king who weds. He paused, and in the pause lay a movement of pieces in 20 men's heads, Varys's most of all. We will put a Baratheon stag in the Lannister fold. There will be no one to say we did not feed the realm. Bread with the stag, wine with the lion, and spice with the old North peasant, if he brings his sister and her child for men to pity. Cersei's breath went out sharp through her nose. She made it a laugh and failed. You think he will take me, she said, after what he heard, after they put that child in his eyes and made him see it was never his dream but a pretty lie. You would sell me to his bitterness. I would sell you to my plans, Tywin said calmly. You will make him forget his bitterness. If you are worth the care I have taken, you will give him sons who are his, and the world will look at those boys and forget whatever feelings it had about some winter girl in a wet cloak. The world does not remember women's faces beyond the first 10 minutes. It remembers banners. Tyrion raised his cup in salute to the cruelty of it, which was at least honest. If I were a betting man, he drawled, I would put coin on the truth that the winter girl does not go to Harrenhal to be pitted. Some women carry their facts about them like knives. People think they won't cut because they are not iron. They are mistaken. Then the more reason, Tywin said, for us to bring silk. He sent riders and scribes to make arrangements with the inevitability of men hauling down a stubborn door. The city did not tremble at the news. It had learned to be jaded. It watched the growing piles of provisions with an interest that never strayed far from the belly. Gold cloaks drilled a little more. Guild masters counted. Messengers came into and out of the tower of the hand like ants simulating purpose. Circe went to her chambers and called for 2 dresses and 3 florists, and then sent them all away and sat at the window with her head against the cool stone and did not move for a very long time. At Riverrun, the river ran high and cold with snowmelt, though it was late in the year. The towers rose clean and wet, new patching on old stone where siege ladders had found purchase, where fire had kissed and been slapped away. Hoster Tully had grown thinner, the flesh that had been comfortable and cheerful tightened by stress into something leaner, and his hair had grayed more than it should have. Still, his eyes were sharp and his hand firm on the railing as he stood on the central bridge and watched riders cross to him. At his left shoulder, Lisa stood restless as a tethered little mare, her shoulders hunched, her eyes wary and wide. Caitlin stood at his right, quiet as snow under fir branches, face composed. It did not look like calm. It was a kind of attention that left no space for her own shaking. Ned crossed the last spans with his retinue close behind him. A stand of northern men who looked out of place and at home at once in any hall where men dealt honestly with walls. He dismounted with the care that tells a man whether a lord respects horseflesh. He bowed first to the lord and then to the house. Yes, Caitlin saw that, the way he made the motion to both, as if the river and the stone had rights as well as the man who kept them. He turned then and went to a bier covered with clean straw. 2 heavy wooden chests had traveled with them under close guard, and they were set down gently on the flagstones. Ned lifted the lids one after the other with a solemnity that made the courtyard hush, and the smell that rose was not rot but the dry incense of care taken. Herbs and linen and the faint sweet ghost of winter flowers laid long ago. Caitlin saw the way his face changed when he looked into the first, and it told her all she needed to know. She did not see what lay there. She did not look. She watched Ned because she needed to know the man, and this was how one knew. By what he did with the things that could not be done. "Lord Hoster," Ned said, "I bring my father and my brother, who left here and did not come again to this gate. I ask your leave to sit a while with them before I take them home, as a man asks leave to breathe before he goes under." "You have it," Hoster said. His voice held and did not break. "And more than leave, my hand and my house and what is left of my joy. Come inside, Eddard Stark. We will not do the important thing in a yard like a baker counting loaves." They went into halls that smelled of river and lemon oil and warm bread. Men stood aside, and women put their mouths shut and made way. In a small chamber whose windows looked down at the green water sliding past stone, Ned stood again. Hoster stood with him and Caitlin, and Lisa at the door with her fingers pressed white on the lintel. Hoster put his hand on Ned's shoulder and spoke a few steady words about sons and the price of banners that had to be paid, and men do not get to choose which coins the world takes when it takes. When he was done, and the lids were closed again and Ned had stood with his forehead against the wood for a long moment, Hoster cleared his throat. He sounded like a man agreeing to do good work and not always liking the tools he had to hand. "There is another matter," he said. "The one we pledged. My daughter." He looked at Caitlin, and the way his gaze softened around her like a cloak made something in Ned's chest ease that he had not known was tight. "And you?" Ned bowed, not like a supplicant, not like a conqueror, like a man bending his back to lift something heavy because it needs lifting. "I am here for that," he said. "I am here for you, for her, for the oath we ma. So when the world was too much with us to allow time for courtesies." Caitlin met his eyes then for the first time in that room. He did not look away. She saw that he was not handsome and that it did not matter. His face had a steadiness in it that she had learned to trust the way one trusts a foundation beam in spring when the river runs high. There would be days and nights to learn the rest, the places where he would smile, the shape his anger would take, the texture of his tenderness. But she could begin here and not be ashamed. "I will not ask you to lie for me," she said. "Men have asked that often enough of women. I am not asking you. If there is a child," she paused, and a muscle in her jaw moved, "bring him to me as he is and let me decide what to do with my pride. If there is a sister whose heart will beat in my house, Let me know her and find the place where we can stand together without hating the space between us." Ned's face changed. It was so quick and small that if she had not been watching, she might have thought a candle flickered. It was relief and gratitude, and something else. Amusement, perhaps, at the world's odd turnings. "He is not mine," he said softly. "That is the lie I would have asked you not to be asked to hold. He is my sister's, and she is alive to own him, and I am spared that particular sin. I have others. There will be time to name them to you, as a man names his debts." Caitlin did not know she had been bracing until she felt herself ease. She nodded once. "Then I will learn him as he is," she said. "If he is a child, we will take the measure of each other without banners to do it for us." She turned slightly, not to look at Lisa but to include her. "And my sister will not like him because he makes her think of something she cannot repair, but she will not say it where he can hear." Lisa flinched and turned away with a little sound and a thin lift of her shoulders that said more than words what she thought of being predicted so neatly. She slipped away like a cat that has been caught where it should not be. "Riverrun will make ready," Hoster said, returning to the business at hand in the masterful way of a lord who understands how grief and duty share a table. "2 days. We will give your men dry clothes and good food and stand a proper watch over those who must be watched over. Then marry and go. Harrenhal calls. You will want the road before all the wagons of banners make it tedious." Ned looked out the window because it was easier than standing under the weight of a father's kindness. The river went by, minds its spiral business of moving forward and remembering every bank it had ever touched. He breathed in river smell and lemon oil and old stone and told himself that these might one day be the smells of home in addition to pine and hot iron and cold. They were wed in a hall lit by river light and candles, with the Seven's images smiling their painted smiles and the words spoken clean and simple. Hoster's mouth trembled only once and then steadied. Caitlin's voice did not shake. Ned's was the voice of a man who had stood in wind all day and had found a house. They exchanged rings, and with them the acknowledgement that there would be days when these rings felt like burdens and days when they felt like promises. They would carry them both ways as long as they could. Afterward there was wine and bread with honey, and fish roasted with herbs and set on thick slices of stale loaf, and children darting underfoot like quick thoughts. Peter Baelish came in the train of some lesser lord and slipped into a corner with his knife smile and his neat clothes and watched with a polite interest that almost hid something small and dangerous. Lisa watched him and did not hide anything. Caitlin noticed and said nothing. There would be time or there would not be, and if there were not, silence would have been wiser than unburdening. After the bedding, which was done with a care for dignity that made it less awful and more funny, the servants never quite managed to make that old country half-game as cruel as it believes itself. The door closed and they stood together in the dim with the candle guttering and both of them a little startled in their own skins. Ned untied her hair with hands that had known reins and sword hilts more often than silk. Caitlin touched the thin white line on his forearm and did not ask. They spoke small words at first, as if introducing themselves to their own bodies. Then they learned something about the ways those bodies wanted and yielded and said not yet and yes and go slowly and there. It was not clumsy. It was not perfect. It was theirs. Later, they lay in the dark with the window open and the sound of the river at their feet, and he told her quietly the shape of the promise he had made to Lyanna, and she told him quietly the shape of the fear she had lived with since she was 10 about being traded like a ferry boat between banks, and they agreed that theirs would be a different crossing. They left 2 mornings later in a rustle of blue and gray and brown. Caitlin stood on the central bridge and watched the northward road find them. Hoster stood with his arm over her shoulders and worried aloud about dowries and blankets and baby linen, as fathers do when they have done all they can and must now disguise their pain with lists. Lisa kissed her sister's cheek a little wildly and pressed a packet into her hand wrapped in blue cloth, an amulet of the mother, smooth with thumb's use, a lock of hair, a small knife, "For cutting meat," she said, too loud, and Caitlin did not ask what meat she thought would be put before her. Peter Baelish bowed with a flourish and said something easy. Caitlin did not catch the words. She was listening to the sound the fairies made as they took men over and brought them back. On the road north the air changed, and the light did, and even the way the dust rose behind the horses felt more honest to Ned. Cattle. Wyan saw it too, in the way the distances widened and the sky lay closer and the trees made fewer gestures and more statements. They camped under beeches and oaks and once in a hollow with cold water and flint to be found if you looked. At night they spoke of lists and how to build rooms and who would sleep where. They did not speak yet about the child, not because they feared it but because it was a task for a room with a fire and not for a ditch where a stone presses your hip. Winterfell rose from the land without announcing itself with banners. It came as a fact, a long low truth in gray and black, smoke rising, roofs shedding rain. The gods would beyond it held its own weather, and the wind that came from its leaves smelled of water standing and moving, of age and patience. Ned's spine settled as a man's spine settles when it finds the chair it knows. He dismounted and put his hand on the gate as if it were a shoulder, and men went past him to their proper places because that is what men do when the arrangement of their days is known to them. Lyanna was there already. She stood on the steps of the great keep with Jon in her arms and a shawl around her shoulders, the stark white of winter's first frost woven into it by some hand that knew snow. The wind lifted hair at her temple. She looked no taller than she had the day she raced boys across the yard in boots, and she looked older than the women who had taught them to sew. Benjen Stark stood at her right, grown into a young man with a jaw like their father's and eyes that had not yet learned to lie even in courtesy. Old Nan peered from the babe's hall like a raven considering whether a story should be dropped on someone's head. Maester Luwin, neat and grave, held his hands folded and his chain sat quietly. The kennel master's boy whistled and was not yet old enough to feel shame for it when a lady was present. Catelyn took a breath and went forward. She did not look at Benjen first, though she saw the kindness waiting in him. She did not look at old Nan or Luwin. She went with her hands open. Lyanna watched those hands with the focus of a hawk, and then lifted her face and smiled a little and put her child into those hands and said, simply, "Meet Jon." Catelyn took the weight of him. It was very little, really little warmth, little bone, little breath, but it was heavy with the promise to be tended, and she felt how easily a person might love such a thing. Jon blinked solemnly at the new face and made a soft, deciding noise. Catelyn did not weep. That would have been unhelpful and untrue to herself. She looked at Lyanna and nodded once. "He is not what I expected," she said. "He is better." Lyanna's mouth trembled and then steadied. "I am not what you expected either," she said, not asking forgiveness, not offering apology. "No," Catelyn said. "You are better." The shape of their days set itself the way cord lies when hung from a nail. It took its curve from the wall and held. Lyanna's chamber looked out over the inner ward. Catelyn's looked over the godswood. The baby slept sometimes in a cradle in one room, sometimes in the other, because it seemed right that two women who were making a new household out of pieces should have their nights interrupted in company. There were matters of bread and meat and wool. Who would be paid for what? How many sacks of barley the last harvest had yielded, and which fields might be planted in flax in spring. Catelyn sat with Luwin in the solar and learned Winterfell's accounts the way a novice learns prayers, with repetition and an honest frustration at the phrases that do not tell you whether they hold promise or only habit. She walked the ramparts and let the wind take her hair, and she went into the godswood because a woman must know what is holy to a place if she is to keep a house there. She stood before the weirwood and felt very watched and not precisely judged. She spoke a few words aloud, partly out of courtesy and partly out of a need in her to put breath to the way the place made her throat ache. When she left, she did not think she had been answered. She did not think she had been refused. Ned moved between stone and yard and godswood as if the spaces between them made him stronger. He stood with Benjen until late under the gatehouse lamp, speaking of boys' business and men's business and what lies between. Benjen listened gravely and asked questions that mattered and made two jokes that were actually funny. When he announced 2 weeks later that he would take the black in the spring, no one in the hall was surprised, though there were startled sounds. Lyanna's face went still and then softened with a complicated pride. Catelyn laid her hand over his and told him she would send him warm stockings with ridiculous red heels so that he would not forget he had once lived where there were colors. Ned nodded once and took him to the godswood, where whatever needed saying could be said in ways the heart understands better than words. Arthur Dayne came to Winterfell with Hightower, and Oswell went in the early snow that falls like thought rather than decision. Men watched them as men watch something they have heard of and never expected to see. White cloaks instead of fur, pale sword at a Dornishman's hip, eyes that looked at nothing they could not put a name to. They were given rooms in the great keep because it was the proper place for men whose shoulders had spent years under vows that sit heavier than steel. The first supper was quiet and restless. Hands sought knife hilts too often. In the morning after that, Arthur Dane went out into the yard and asked for a beater trunk to be set up and a dozen swords to be left in a heap and a crate of apples. He split the apples with Dawn without drama and handed pieces to boys and girls who had edged into the yard on the scent of something unusual. Then he took a sword that had been a squire's practice weapon and showed 3 men how to use it to live. Elonger, Hightower told a tale in a chair by the fire to 4 old men who had not wanted to come close and found themselves reluctant to leave. Oswell went helped Illyria count spoons and said nothing to anyone else. By nightfall the alarm in the hall had settled into an awareness that they were strange but not monsters, and there is always room at any hearth for a peculiar guest who can chop wood and mend tack. Ned spoke long with Arthur in the Godswood on a cold day that made breath stream like banners. They stood beyond the weirwood's face, the heart tree's red leaves holding frost in their veins, and the pool black with thin ice along its edges. "I have come to stand between that boy and men who mistake their fear for policy," Arthur said, looking toward the keep where Lyanna's chamber window faced the yard. "I do not ask your permission. I tell you because you are a lord, and you will arrange the hall to account for new pillars. If the realm chooses to call a different king than the one my vows would ask of me, then so be it. This sword can guard a child in the snow as well as a throne in the south." Ned considered him. He thought of the way Lyanna's mouth softened when she put her hand on Jon's back. He thought of Robert's big hands opening and closing on emptiness. He thought of Dorn and Ashara's eyes in the blue gallery, and the taste of salt when grief gets into a man's throat and will not leave. "There will come a day," he said slowly, "when a rider from the south brings us paper wrapped in ribbon that tells us to send that boy somewhere else, to court, to safety, to something called honor. He will be 5 or 7 or 10. The words will be written by men who can make guilt look like prudence. If I send him, will you go?" Arthur lifted his gaze from the weirwood to Ned's face. He smiled, small and true. "You are asking a man who swore himself to a line of fire whether he will walk on coals when called," he said. "Yes. And if you do not send him, and men come to take him, I will be glad I am here." They stood in the cold until their ears burned. Hightower came quietly and stood with them. He did not add any words. He did not need to. The 3 of them were a kind of answer. Word came up the King's Road on raven's wings, made breathless by the speed that men put in their messages when they want the world to change faster than it will. Harrenhal stood ready and cold and full of men who had decided how they would vote before men had finished laying the tables. Tywin Lannister had come with carts of bread and wine and plates and chairs, and an army that did not call itself an army because it did not wear its iron on its shirt. The Arryn banners hung in sober rows. The Tyrell tents glowed green. The red wine ships lay in the river like fat, sleeping fish. Robert had found a griffin banner in a chest and set it behind him because he liked the look of it. Jon Arryn had permitted himself to sigh and say nothing. Stannis had not come. He had gone to sea with a face like a blade and a fleet, and the gulls had watched him go and wondered if he would be enough to hear the storm a mother was making at Dragonstone. Word from the south said the queen had birthed a daughter in a night when lightning walked the ridge like a lord, that a woman with a switch traced salt lines on the floor around a bed and nothing inside them burned, that the fires afterward slept sullen on their own ashes. Reports lie as well as men do, but sometimes their lies come true later. Ned took Lyanna and the child and a small company and rode south with Catelyn beside him and Benjen behind. The snow did not last long. They dropped down into damp and cold and gray like metal. On the second day out of Moat Cailin, they met a ragged party of men from the neck, reeds braided around their wrists, faces painted with old mud and meaning. Howland Reed had sent them to see them safely across places that do not show themselves to men who do not listen. They carried news of frogs and fish and the way night birds called, which is to say no news that mattered to men who write letters and all the news that matters to men who wish to live to read them. Lyanna thanked them with her eyes, which is the only coin they required. Illyria counted them twice without being caught and declared they were as many as she was years old, which made Howland look at Ned and grin and made Ned suddenly think of children learning to count with pebbles, and he did not know why that made his eyes sting. Harrenhal appeared out of the mist like a punishment. Its black towers rose like the bones of a giant burned long ago. The great hall was a mouth that had never quite shut. Men had made it livable again enough times to make it worse. Flames sat in the hearths and threw shadows that made the melted stone flow. Banners hung from hooks that had seen better cloth. The kitchens worked as if they were feeding a wedding in a county full of cousins. The great council began with the dull immensity such things like. Men stated things men already knew. The faith's men spoke with a serenity that refuses to see what it would undo if it looked. And then a little Freilier man with ink under his nails said quietly that he had seen the ledger line himself, and his hand did not shake when he passed the copy to John Arryn. Maesters discussed precedent and two of them disagreed, and the way their disagreement stayed polite taught Ned as much as the content. Dorne's seat was empty, its banner rolled on the pole. A letter lay on the table in its place, its script precise and displeased, and Oberyn Martell's dusty, defiant hand below the princely formalities. If this council decides to weigh honor against convenience on a scale bought from Tywin Lannister's smiths, Dorne will see you and mend its plowshares how it needs to. Tywin came in gold and white and red and looked like a story about brass that the seven tell when they are drunk and feel unkind. Jaime did not take a seat. He stood behind the Lannister chair and watched the room as if he might be asked to judge the whole of it for beauty. Cersei came in green and the hope that all that green implies and sat where women may sit and be seen but not say. Robert sat in black and blue and looked at the floor more often than at faces. Jon Arryn did most of the speaking. That is how one knows a realm is serious, when it allows the patient man to shape its breath. The first day did nothing but lay the table. The second day showed knives. Jon Arryn proposed, in the careful language that makes men feel clever agreeing to it, that the realm name Robert Baratheon its king by right of victory and necessity, that it recognize the child Jon, son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, as legitimate by the law and under the wardship of his mother and Lord Eddard Stark, with a guarantee of his safety and the extinguishment of his claim to the Iron Throne by decision of this council, that the surviving royal issue on Dragonstone be offered terms of mercy, exile to a known court, an annuity of no insult, and the requirement that they live out their days without banners, that the Kingsguard be reconstituted, allowing those white swords who choose to lay their oath on the altar of this decision to serve the new king, and allowing a portion to remain with the child as his guard until he comes of 12 years, that Tywin Lannister formally and publicly disavow unauthorized actions in the sack and affirm the crown's monopoly on legal violence, that Mace Tyrell and Paxter Redwyne be thanked for their service with grants of trade privileges to be defined, that Dorne be offered recompense of a kind that is not coins, though coins may be in the purse, that he went on, line by line, staking out a path like a man doing math where wolves could overhear. Randall Tarley rose to speak against allowing a child with dragon blood to live under any banner. He did it with the decency of a man who tells a neighbor he must cut down a beloved tree because its roots have found the foundation. Tywin did not rise. He did not need to. The men around him had learned his silences. Mace favored the compromise, with his own coins to be measured later in trade wins and favors owed. Paxter Redwyne spoke of ships and the time it takes to build any fleet worth the name. A pious lord from the Reach opined that the annulment of Elia Martell's marriage was too convenient to be countenanced. A cooler Reach voice pointed out that convenience is often the form truth prefers to take when men are in need. The Storm Lords were with Robert. They would have crowned the man over a Moe's nest to get him a seat that fit his size. Men from the Riverlands were content to follow where Jon Arryn led because he had kept their fields from burning when he could and had kept the price of their burning honest when he could not. When men looked to the north, they found Ned, and he stood. He did not waste words. He said the north would have peace with its bones brought home and its dead not mocked by law pretending to be convenience. He said the boy would be raised where he could run and be scolded and learn to be kind and perhaps to be cunning later if the world demanded it. And he said that if any man came to harm the child on the road of law or of steel, that man would find the same road under his horse when he turned away, and he would not get far. He said that if Robert was to be king, then the North would bend its stiff neck and ask only that the burdens be shared by sane men and not by cooks with knives. Arthur Dane stood and did not touch his sword. He said 3 sentences about vows and mercy and the difference between strength and cruelty that made 2 men stare at the floor and 1 look away. Gerald Hightower said nothing. He did not need to. His stillness said enough. Tywin spoke last, as men like him do. He spoke of order and the memory of men, how short it is, what it forgets and what it insists upon. He spoke of the cost of keeping a child alive to make quills tremble. He acknowledged Jon Arryn's path as if he were sizing a bolt of cloth, and he did not say he would support it. He said that if Robert wished the realm would support him, then the realm would be glad to see him married to a house that could bring gold and grain and better behavior in King's Landing. He did not have to say the name. When men thought of a lioness, they thought of Cersei because she was wearing the color and because a dozen little things had been arranged to make them think of her. The way she sat at the right angle to the light, the way a rumor had gone out that she had been generous to the orphans of a certain street who had not been burned through no fault of their own. In halls like this, the small work matters. Men like Tywin know to employ hands with very neat minds to do it. Robert did not look at Cersei. He looked at Lyanna, standing at the edge of the great room with the child asleep against her, and then he looked at the table, and then he looked at Jon Arryn. "Write your words for them to stamp," he said hoarsely. "If I am to be king, I will be king over a kingdom near enough at peace to drink without counting the number of times I lift the cup. I will not see another baby's brains on stone and call it policy." His gaze flicked, accidentally, to Jaime Lannister, and an old hot thing flared between them and died before it could take air. "We will have the mercy you set. We will have the guarantee, and I will marry where it stitches holes." He said it as if he were agreeing to have a leg set. It hurt a dozen men in a dozen different ways. It made a way forward, and wheels began to turn at once because men had been waiting for the moment to move. Cersei's mouth softened. Her eyes did not grow kinder, but they grew warmer with a certain relief. Jon Arryn wrote and sharpened his pen twice for the pleasure of precision. Men who had been carrying their opinions UT like concealed knives took them out and stabbed the table with them and then offered to help hold the wood together. By the 3rd day, the parchment lay on the table with ribbons waiting. Men signed, thinking of where they would go next and how they would eat there. At night, when the council room was empty and the fire burned low with orange patience, Ned found Lyanna standing in the mouth of a ruined tower that looked out over the lake. The wind came around the stone in a way that made a man feel like he could hear what had been said in these halls when giants had learned to be cruel. Lyanna did not speak until he had been there long enough for the cold to undercut the warm wine. "He will marry her," she said, as if making note of rain. "He will," Ned said. "Good," she said. "They deserve each other." He glanced at her sharply, and then he saw she meant not insult but odd, honest aptness, the way 2 pieces of wood make a sound a house needs. "Do you regret telling him?" he asked quietly. She turned her head and smiled without mirth. "Do you regret breathing?" she countered. "I regret only that truth did not make us all gentler. It rarely does, but it made the shape of the world cleaner. I can live under that, even if it is cold." He stood with her a while. The child slept in the crook of her arm in the way that makes time gentle for a moment and then cruel when it passes. Far out on the lake, ice made a sound like a door being opened slowly. Ned thought of the men who had died to bring them here and wondered whether any of them would like the way the table had been set. He thought the answer would be both yes and no, as most answers are. The marriage was done quietly. Gold was promised. Grain assured. Smiles arranged. History noted. Women nodded or spat depending on their kitchens. Cersei wore her hair like a coin the sun wants to keep. Robert stood beside her like a man waiting to be told whether he had broken a law and whether he could pay the fine. There was music enough for the forms and wine enough to require a certain number of chamber pots. Cersei danced twice with Robert and once with Jon Arryn and once with Mace Tyrell and not at all with Ned. Her eyes slid past him as if he were honest wood. She did not look at Lyanna. Lyanna did not attend. She sat in a small chamber with Ashera Dane, who had come with the white cloaks for witness and stayed out of dislike for too many lies in too few sentences. They drank a thin wine that smelled faintly of oranges and spoke of babies with colic and of sisters and of riding in snow and of what a mouth looks like when a man swallows words he wishes not to. On the third day, a raven with salt on its feathers beat itself down through a high slit in Harrenhal's stone. It shook itself and cried once and died on the flagstones. Men went quiet when ravens do that. The letter tied to its leg said that Dragonstone had burned with lightning and storm, but not the way fire eats houses. It had burned the way anger burns a man's sleep. The queen had died on a birthing bed and left behind a daughter whose first breath had tasted soot and salt. Viserys Targaryen had fled with his sister under sail and storm, and the storm had broken ships around him, as if it were punishing any man who tried to bring a roof over his head. Stannis had taken the castle after, with a face like a prophecy no one wanted when it came true, and found the fires sleeping and no dragon bones to trouble him. He wrote the letter himself in scratching letters by a lamp while a gull pecked at a fish quietly on the windowsill and did not look up. He signed it without flourish. Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone. Robert read it in the council hall and set it down and stared at his hands. "Good," he said. Sounded wrong. He cleared his throat. Good. He was thinking of babes and blood on stone. He was thinking of a child he had not killed. He was not a subtle man. He was making himself become something that would not shatter when he stepped. It did not flatter him. It did not diminish him. It made him human in a way that men under banner seldom are allowed to be. Winter came early to the north that year, not in deadly earnest but like a front rider sent ahead by a king to warn the keepers to fix their gates and gather their stores. Ned and Catelyn and Lyanna came home with the boy and laid Ricard and Brandon's bones under Winterfell, where stones remember names longer than men do. Benjen took the black when the first ice made the moat a mirror, and Lyanna stood at the gate and watched him ride out with eyes that were not dry and not drenched. Arthur Dayne took to walking the walls at night with the ease of a man who has always not slept well. Hightower read by firelight with a child at his knee, who had never thought to be told stories by a man with such a hard face and such gentle care in his voice. Catelyn learned the words to the old northern songs, and they caught in her throat at unexpected places and surprised her with how they felt like hands on her back. She took over stores and counting and the small court where 2 men argued about a pig's parentage and 3 women argued about the best time to plant carrots. She and Lyanna quarreled twice, once about lace and once about whether the boy should be held when he cried or left to find his own peace, and then found their way to each other again by speaking aloud what the anger had been holding like coals. In the early mornings, when the kitchen girls were still yawning and the world had the clean cold of a well-scrubbed, they sat with warm cups and spoke of their mothers and what they had believed and what had not come true. In King's Landing, Cersei learned which corridors to use and which watches to avoid and which women to give gifts to for the kindness of their gossip. She smiled at Robert when he came to her bed and learned the shape of the man he had become rather than the boy of songs, and she made herself oft where he was rough and hard, where he was sudden and flattering, when he wanted to believe he had been merciful. She did not love him. She had loved an idea once, and the idea had died. She could make something out of what she had. She had done harder things with worse tools. The city watched her, and she watched it back through windows, and through the reports Littlefinger brought her with sly small bows, as if he were setting her a puzzle she would enjoy. She took his puzzles and smiled, and sometimes omitted the payment and sometimes paid double and let him try to read what that meant. Tywin Lannister returned to the west and taught men to remember the price of disobedience. He did not let his name be spoken too loudly in King's Landing except in rooms where it was useful. Jaime learned how to stand very still for long periods without seeming bored, and Varys learned everything he had not known already and put it in his mouth like a sweet to roll it on his tongue where no one could see. Stannis returned to King's Landing thin and oddly luminous, like a man who has decided not to be loved and so does not waste himself trying to be. Robert made him Lord of Dragonstone, as if giving a man the place he had already taken were generosity. The brothers drank together once and fought together twice and then did both in the same evening, and after that they spoke little, which suited them both. Ser Davos knelt for his fingers. Stannis took the joints cleanly, like a surgeon cutting something out that will kill if left. Davos, white-faced, thanked him because that, as he understood, was how you tell a man you will keep walking with him even if he will overcount the steps. Later, Stannis's hand fell on Davos's shoulder with a weight that meant more than gentleness would, and Davos felt his own life make a shape that looked like Yu's, and he smiled a private, lopsided smile at the way the world undoes a man's designs and draws better on the mess. Word went out and word came in. Dorn sent a tight letter that conceded nothing and agreed to watch and wait. And Oberyn came to the city with a smile like a knife and went away without cutting anything, which made men more nervous than if he had. The Iron Islands muttered in their winter halls and threw bones to guess what spring would let them take. In the east, some free cities sharpened their quills and wrote cautious invitations to Viserys Targaryen to bring his blood and his hungry mouth to their tables. And he learned to eat with a fork and to say yes where no would have offended and yes where yes would serve him better. His sister grew in a house with a balcony facing a sea that does not forgive, learning the shape of kindness from women who had learned the shape of cruelty and chosen to be otherwise when the room allowed. Winter in Winterfell deepened and then wore a face that could be lived with. Fires took on the smell of different woods as men cut what the snows gave them. Stew pots grew thick and then thinner. Lyanna taught Jon to stand, and then to take 2 steps between her and the chair, and then to laugh when he fell in a huff and found the floor was not the enemy. Catelyn showed him how to make a fist around a carrot and suck on it without gagging. Old Nan told him he was a little lord and then a little dragon and then scolded herself and told him he was a little boy and not a beast at all. Ned walked the walls with him tucked under his cloak when the wind was mild enough to pretend at mercy, and he spoke to the boy as if he could understand the names of the stars and the way ice sings in its sleep. Arthur Dayne put a little stick in his hand one day and let him chew it. When Lyanna scolded him with mock ferocity, Arthur shrugged in a Dornish way and told her a tale of a boy who had bit a spear and grown to be the finest of his cohort in 3 kingdoms, and Willa snorted and asked which kingdom thought that was an accomplishment. Snow fell and melted and fell again. A lord from the Rills sent a gift of sheep with long fleece. A house from the Barrowlands sent a bench carved with stories of men who do not believe they will die. Catelyn learned that some of the women in Winterfell could be relied upon to bring their troubles early, when there were solutions, and others came very late, when what they wanted was not a solution but a witness. She learned the taste of both and did not mistake them. She and Lyanna found ways around and through each other's moments of being difficult, and sometimes they failed and spoke hard words and then undid them with honesty. At times Catelyn woke in the night and listened to Ned breathe and to Jon's small steady breath and to Lyanna moving 2 rooms away, and she let her feelings be not tidy and not beyond bearing, and that was a kind of victory she did not know she would value. News came north in spring like shoots through thawed ground. Little fingers and neat hands had been at work in King's Landing. A new hands tourney was announced with prizes grand enough to make hard men dream. Ned thought of going and then did not go. He sent a letter of congratulations and a polite refusal and a gift of a stallion he did not especially like but which would flatter a certain kind of man. Robert wrote back, petulant and fond, demanding he bring his northern face south before he forgot how to laugh. Ned smiled and told the letter what the next year would allow. He did not know. On a day when the last of the snow ran in little silver streaks along the packed path to the kennel, a rider came with the Lannister colors on his sleeve and a leather tube strapped to his saddle. He dismounted with a care that said he had been spun off a horse by ice before and had learned his lesson, and he bowed to Ned in the yard with more respect than the gold lion usually paid to the gray direwolf. Ned took the tube and went to the solar because letters from that direction read better where there was oil on the air to hold their W. Ords. The letter inside was written in a hand that did not waste ink. Jon Arryn's. Ned felt the first word in his bones before he read it because men's names have a weight you learn to know. It was a simple letter, stripped to what a man would want carved on stone to save labor. Robert wanted him south. There were matters that needed a hard mind and a soft heart and a stubborn neck. There were matters that smelled of lion and of rot both. There were men whispering into Robert's ear who knew how to make honey sound like medicine. Jon Arryn asked him to come. He did not say, "I am old and the stairs grow longer and the young men are too eager," but Ned heard it. He read the letter twice, as if reading it again would change the taste of it. He found Lyanna in the yard teaching Jon to throw a ball. She did it the way she did most things, serious and careful and with room for laughter at her own expense. The ball did not go far. That did not matter. The boy's face lit as if someone had lifted clouds from in front of the sun. Catelyn stood a little apart with a spool of blue thread in her hand that she had stopped looking at, watching the 2 of them, and Arthur Dayne leaned on the rail with his arms crossed. the picture of a proud uncle whose dignity was sometimes a low wall a child could climb. "I have to go south," Ned said. He did not dress it in other words. Caitlyn's head turned slowly. Lyanna's hands paused in the air. Jon babbled and threw the ball with perfect unconcern, and it struck Arthur in the chest, and he made an exaggerated face of surprise and pain that made the boy laugh until he fell over. "Life can be so disobedient to our solemnities." "How long?" Lyanna asked. The question held other questions in its net. She did not let them wriggle out. "I do not know," Ned said. Robert is Robert, and Jon Arryn is tired. I cannot promise swiftness. I can promise care. I can promise I will pull like an ox in mud to get back." Caitlyn put the spool of thread in her pocket. "I will keep this house," she said. "And him." She nodded toward the boy, who had crawled up and toddled toward the ball with a ferocity of purpose that made old Nen snort. "And her." She nodded at Lyanna, and her eyes softened at some private humor neither of them needed to explain. "Bring your bones back when you are done, whatever shape they are in." Arthur shifted on the rail. "If Robert is Robert and enemies are enemies," he said carefully, "it may be useful to have a white cloak at your shoulder who is not counted among those already counted. With what face does a white-cloaked man walk into the capital to guard a lord who is not a king?" Ned asked, not to mock, not to refuse, genuinely for the pleasure of understanding how men make their vows walk. Arthur smiled that little smile again. "With the same face he lives under roofs that are not dragons," he said. "The realm declared it wished a child with dragons in his blood to live and be guarded. If there are men in the city who do not care for that decision and wish to annul it without calling another council, I may see them before they decide to see you. I will wear a gray cloak, if that makes men's hearts less cramped." Lyanna's eyes went distant for a moment, as if she were listening to the air above Winterfell for the sound it would make without a certain footfall. "Go with him," she said. "Go, and come back." The road south would be different now. No banners snapping like flags at a fair. No hungry horses drinking the last of the puddles. The realm had settled into a shape that men could pretend was permanent. It is when men pretend that the next turn is hardest to see. Ned said his goodbyes carefully, as if packing glass, and left nothing unsaid that might be needed if words had to stand in his place. He went to the crypt and laid a hand on cold stone and thought of how voices come back to you in rooms where they are not. And he took the road with a mind full of the sound of his sister's laugh and his wife's steadiness and his son's. No, not his son, not the way the world would have it, but his John's serious stare when a ball rolls away and you must choose whether to cry or to go after it. They rode in green light as leaves came on and hung, and then in glare across fields where men bent to work, and then in dust near little towns where children called out and women shaded their eyes because it is always a small wonder when a lord passes. They slept in halls sometimes, and sometimes in the open under a sky so full of stars that it made a man's chest feel tight. Arthur rode at Ned's shoulder when the road narrowed, and Howland, who had come as far as the neck with them for love and started back for his own water with a melancholy smile, sent frogs and a joke through a boy so we would know he had been there. Near King's Landing the smell changed in the air like a warning. Fires in the distance, too many for a village. Tanner's vats. The brine and rot of fish left to hope they would be fresher than their eyes said they were. The walls rose gray and honest and then not honest, patched with less than love. They went in under the gaze of guards who had learned to stand and stare with their mouths not quite shut. The city did not cheer. Cities only cheer when someone has paid them to or when they are drunk enough to love anything. The Red Keep had been scrubbed to within an inch of its life. It smelled of lye and lemon and of something flowers had tried to cover and failed. Jon Arryn met him in a room that had once held queens playing at being women and had learned better. He looked older. There are ways men look older. This was the way that comes from carrying a thing that does not look heavy until someone else tries to lift it. "Ned," he said, and they embraced, and the old lines refit themselves. "There are men here who do not love the shape we made. They smile very nicely. The king smiles very nicely. Tywin does not smile at all. The queen chooses when to. Varys smiles like a man holding a baby that is not his." "I brought steel," Ned said, "and patience. You will need both." John Aaron answered. And you will need something else. Call it stubborn rightness if you like. There is a thing going about in the halls under 1,000 names. Ambition, prudence, necessity, revenge. It is trying to be law. I need you to stand in its path and ask it to show its papers. They began. There were petitions from men who had waited until it was safe to be brave. There were approvals to be granted that would make future law easier to enforce if granted now and harder if denied. There were men in the City Watch who liked the taste of coin more than the taste of keeping streets safe. There were whispers in the cellars of a tavern where 3 knives lay under the beer barrel. There were women in silk who had advice about taxes that would have made the river run upstream if taken. There was a small matter of the royal mint. The gold in the coins had grown light and no one had been consulted. Ned sat with the master of coin, Peter Baelish, who wore his knowledge like a lover who will forgive many small sins for a few large pleasures, and told him, with courtesy, that coins should weigh what they ought and where would he like to find the metal. A question that made Peter's eyes light as if he had been given an excuse to practice a trick he had long learned and seldom been applauded for. There was a larger matter of justice in a case that would arouse too much heat. A lord's son and a tradesman's daughter and a bed and a knife and a whispered threat. Ned took the measure of the father's grief and of the young man's fear and of what the city would bear. He found a path that cut both and did not pretend it was clean. He slept badly that night, which is a kind of honesty too. Robert wavered between his better self and the self that demanded easier drink. He hunted boar and came back proud and smeared and laughed, and he held audiences and sneered properly at men who deserved it and badly at men who did not. And he went to his lady wife's bed and sometimes went other places, and Circe endured and smiled and practiced being a queen with a sweetness that would rot if not consumed in small bites. She came to Ned once with a question that was not a question. What does your sister feed her baby when he has fever? And Ned told her, and she listened, and he imagined, for a moment, what a friend she might have been if the world had given her a piece to play that did not require all her teeth. The moment passed. The day went on. He signed 3 orders that would shave 2 different men at different times and hoped not to draw blood. Arthur Dane walked the keep in a cloak the color of rain. Twice he was challenged by men who knew his face and did not wish to know it, and twice he answered politely and without harm, and the challengers found themselves reconsidering both their opinions and the way their boots fit. Men who remembered the sack looked at him and looked away. Children saw his sword and guessed at magic like children always do and were not entirely wrong. Hightower did not like the city. His face made that fact known without the discourtesy of speech. He watched Varys once in a hall, and the look that passed between them was the sort that would make a younger man run a finger under his collar. Varys smiled and told a story about a baker who had lost his recipe book and found it again under the flour sack where he had left it in his panic. Hightower did not smile. Oswell went spent too often in the stables, where animals do not care what uniform a man wears if his hand on their muzzles is correct. Ned's nights were full, letters to the north, to Catelyn with lists and with small words that matter more than lists. Letters to Lyanna with nothing in them that would trouble her rest because he knew she deserved that rest. Letters to John Aaron that did not require walking down a hall to the room where John slept because sometimes men must write even to men in reach so that words will hold still. He wrote to Stannis once, thought better of sending it, and sent it anyway with no expectation of joy returning and did not mind. It was a letter to a man who would count it as proof that a wall had stood where he thought it would. Stannis wrote back 5 lines of news and a remark about the quality of rope that meant, "I saw you." That was enough. On a day when the sky over the bay had the color of beaten tin, a rumor came under the door like smoke. A man had been found with a sealed knife and a quiet face under a bridge in the fish market district. The knife had been meant for a child. Which child was not made clear by the men who had convinced themselves it would be a good deed. Ned knew which one the world would choose. He called Arthur and Hightower without ceremony, and the 3 of them stood around a map and did not say aloud the names that lay under their tongues. "We will move him," Arthur said. "Not now, not under watch, but soon and quietly, and to a place where men who come looking for him will ask the wrong questions and be discouraged by the wrong answers." "He is in Winterfell," Ned said, more for himself than them, as if he could lay a spell on the North Road with his statement. "He is in more than Winterfell," Hightower said. He is wherever men would do harm to make their days easier. We will do harm to those men's days. Carefully. One does not trap ivy by crushing the wall. Ned sat late that night and wrote 3 letters. One to Caitlin telling her where to place guards and where to leave gaps that look like permission. One to Lyanna telling her nothing of knives but something of apples and of a memory of their mother that had come to him smelling of soap. One to John Aaron that said, "We must not pretend we have solved anything." John replied the next day with a single sentence that made Ned close his eyes and smile. "We have given ourselves a better problem." The days lengthened. The court learned whether this king would be worst at banquets or better at hunting, least dangerous at noon or at dusk, whether this hand would sell or hoard, whether this queen would wear her disappointment like a crown or like a knife. Ned found that sometimes the only thing to do was repeat himself, like a hammer setting a nail that does not wish to be set. He took to walking at night along the inner wall between 2 particular towers whose guards were quiet and honest, and sometimes he would find Arthur there, and sometimes Hightower, and once he found Jaime Lannister staring at the city with his mouth set as if he were thinking of a piece of music he would never be allowed to play. "You hate it here," Ned said, without rancor. "I hate the part of me that does not," Jaime answered. "It used to be that my choices looked like men and I could hit them with a sword. Now they look like tables set with ham." Ned laughed, an involuntary small bubble. "There are worse enemies than ham," he said, Jaime's mouth crooked. "You sound like a northern tale," he said. "I suppose they are the only ones worth hearing. The southern sort always end with a woman's sigh and a curtain." "They often begin that way as well," Ned said, and Jaime laughed outright and went on his rounds with lighter boots. In the 4th month of Ned's time in the city, word came on a quiet morning with gulls arguing over a fish head on the parapet. The queen was with child. The announcement went out with all the proper ringing of bells and a shower of flower petals that had been dredged from winter storage and dusted. Robert became a larger, looser thing, drunk on the idea of sons that would run in the yard. He shouted for boars and for tapestries and for wine and for little wooden swords to be made with names already cut on them, and for the iron chair to be melted and recast into something a child could sit on without cutting his backside. Cersei managed not to wince at that last. She smiled and nodded and counted out the days on a ribbon in her head. John Aaron smiled and then did not later, in the privacy of writing. Ned wrote to Caitlin and Lyanna that night and told them in plain words that would carry in both their veins. He did not write what else he thought. That this child might be a balm on a wound men kept from being allowed to scar, that it might be a spur instead, that it might be both. He did not write many things. He signed the letters and sealed them and went to the wall. Arthur stood there and they did not speak. The city stretched in front of them as if it were a creature with its own breath and its own patience. In the morning, John Aaron coughed blood into a cloth and folded the cloth carefully so that no one would see. He sat and wrote 3 letters that he did not send. In the afternoon, he rose and went to the king and spoke of a thing he had put off a half-dozen times because men older than he had warned him that a king must be approached slantwise if you wish him to look at something he will not like. Robert did not look. He drank and laughed and said later, 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 as men do when the truth calls at the door. John Aaron returned to his chamber and drank a small cup of some bitter draught and closed his eyes for a moment like a man standing before a long flight of steps. When he opened them, Ned sat in the chair opposite him, and the look on Ned's face said the steps would be climbed together. John Aaron smiled, and it made all the lines in his face gentler. "A better problem," John said very low. "Yes," Ned said, "a better one." They began to climb. And far to the north, where a woman held a child up to the light to see the color in his eyes and a white cloak leaned into the wind that smelled like knives, the day unfolded with the care and carelessness that make a life, the old gods listening, the new gods nodding, and men below them unconsciously making history not with famines and flights and strokes of steel alone, but with the simple persistence of lives tended, rules insisted upon, laughter allowed, truths made into paths by many, feet